Book 1, Chapter 30 The Children of the Gods. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The blood-soaked queen hadn't completely lost all consciousness. Even though she had been nearly insensate, she had still been able to maintain a strand of conscious thought. She had felt as though she had fallen into an endless black hole of darkness, pain, and exhaustion. She was like someone who was drowning into a bottomless pool of water. No matter how she struggled, there was nothing she could do. This sense of despair had been dragging her further and further downwards, and that stifling sensation caused her will to suffer. To fall into that endless slumber would be a form of escape. Why did she have to live while weighed down by so many burdens? But as soon as this thought appeared, a thought that was 1,000 times more powerful instantly arose and overwhelmed it. No. I cannot die. My mission is not yet complete. I cannot fall before I have done what I sought out to do. I must find him and kill him, not just for revenge, not just to cleanse my clan's reputation, but because it is my responsibility as a child of the gods, and my mission as a demon hunter. If I have to die, I'll die a glorious death in battle, not a shameful death in a place like this. Noel.n Almighty gods, please give your devout follower the strength to uphold my convictions. It seemed as though the blood-soaked queen's resolute, pious prayer had been effective. Energy poured into her exhausted, enervated frame, allowing her to regain partial consciousness. Alas, her mind was still fogged and she wasn't able to move in the slightest. She could only sense that she was now in a completely foreign environment. Someone was walking back and forth in the area around her. The person actually used a moist cloth to wipe away at her face. This caused the queen to feel both rage and terror. These were the gods. Forsaken wastelands. If she ended up falling under the control of these ugly, vile, and brutish wastelanders while she was too weak to fight back, she didn't even dare imagine what was going to happen to her. The blood-soaked queen was unable to control any part of her body. She couldn't do so much as twitch her fingers. Gradually, her mind once more began to sink into that dazed fugue state, but the fiery pain in her throat caused her to feel extremely miserable. Water. She needed water. A while later, she felt something cool and refreshing being poured into her mouth. She instinctively gulped at the water, feeling that fiery sensation in her throat slowly subside. Her body now felt much more comfortable than before, and as a result she once more fell into a deep slumber. By the time she woke up once more, she had already regained part of her strength. When she suddenly opened her clear, jewel-bright eyes, the first thing she saw was a dilapidated ceiling that had cracks in it, allowing her to clearly see the light of the stars spilling in from outside. It was night time. She had actually been passed out for nearly an entire day. But before she had a chance to think on what this meant, she suddenly saw a dirty hand begin to furtively stretch out towards her chest. This caused every slumbering cell within the queen's body to awaken and burst with furious power. She leapt to her feet with the agility of a female panther, then grabbed that offending, impudent hand with thunderbolt speed and pulled it backwards, hard. As for her other hand, she used it to press down on the bastard's head. The queen poured all of her power into that right hand of hers, but the head did not instantly explode into countless pieces. Which was odd. Only now did the queen realize, to her astonishment, that her right hand was now wrapped in dirty, crude bandages which smelled faintly of medicine. Her gloves had already been removed. Cloud Hawk could immediately and clearly sense those strange ripples emanating from the queen's body. There was no mistaking it. It was this power which allowed her to use her strange equipment. If I hadn't removed her gloves to treat her wounds, my fucking head would have been burnt to a cinder by now. This woman really was a nasty character. Calm down, calm down. I'm just an ordinary mercenary of Black Flag Outpost. Cloud Hawk was in so much pain that large beads of sweat had formed on his forehead. I saw you had passed out, so I brought you back to treat your wounds. I didn't do anything else, honest. Shut up. The queen was still gripped by shock and rage. Clearly, she didn't believe him. Her voice, however, was extremely pleasant to the ear. It sounded like the tinkling of fine jade or the singing of a bird. It carried an alluring, magnetic quality to it. Although her voice was quite cold, it also contained undisguisable hints of her youthfulness. The demonic mask definitely contained some sort of voice-altering mechanism. The blood-soaked queen could sense that her body was still very weak. She wasn't sure how long she would be able to maintain her current state, and so she immediately began to study her surroundings. She was in a small, crude, and dilapidated wooden room that was so small there was almost no place to stand. There was a battered wooden desk that had a damaged clay basin atop it, and a bloody towel which was soaking inside the basin. The surrounding area was strewn with ripped ribbons, and there was also a half-filled bottle of an unknown liquid that emanated a strange medicinal fragrance. As for the person in her hands, he was a half-grown boy of 15 years of age. He wasn't very tall, but he was extremely thin. His black hair was tousled and his entire body was covered with filth as well as wounds. Some of the wounds were old, some were new. He looked the same as any of the other wastelanders she had seen, but there was an alert, honest look in his eyes that made him seem like a decent person. Who else saw me? The queen could sense her body growing weaker and weaker, and she couldn't help but slightly loosen her grip over Cloud Hawk. In the wastelands, only the law of survival of the fittest applied. If anyone else saw how weak and powerless she was right now, things would turn grim for her. Speak. N.N01. Everyone was busy divvying up the spoils from the sweepers. I found you in an alleyway and secretly brought you back. Nobody else saw you besides me. Cloud Hawk knew exactly what the queen was worried about. Don't worry. I won't tell a soul. No one will know that you've been injured. The blood-soaked queen's eyes narrowed into slits, but not out of anger, rather, she was just too tired and too weak, so weak that she no longer had the strength to keep him pressed down. Her vice-like grip loosened around his elbow, and Cloud Hawk immediately scurried several steps backwards. The blood-soaked queen hurriedly tore off the bandages and put on her powerful gloves, but from start to finish her wary gaze had yet to leave Cloud Hawk. She first moved to the doorway, scanning the outside area and making sure that there was no one else hidden nearby. She then inspected herself. Her clothes seemed to be in good shape, and there was no sign that anything inappropriate had happened. Had the kid been telling the truth? Cloud Hawk shrugged helplessly. Now can you trust me? Why were you following me? The queen's voice was still filled with cold hostility. There was no way someone would have found her, by coincidence, immediately after she passed out. What are you scheming? Who are you? Cloud Hawk hesitated for a moment, but when he saw that murderous look in her eyes he hurriedly explained, I didn't. You got it all wrong. Your gloves and your cross were emanating a strange sound that I could hear from far away. I followed them and was able to find you. The queen's face turned dark. Lying to me will result in a very painful death. I'm telling the truth, I swear. I can hear sounds coming from the gloves and the cross. Cloud Hawk could sense that she really was at the very verge of killing him. A sudden thought crossed his panicked mind, and he immediately called out, I know that there was someone else outside the outpost who also had powers like yours, and I was able to hear him coming as well. The blood-soaked queen paused, startled. This didn't seem plausible at all. She had never heard of anything like this before. Her face slowly turned calmer, but her wariness didn't lessen one bit as she allowed Cloud Hawk to continue to speak. That person didn't show himself, but I know that he was the one who summoned the sandstorm. I'm right, aren't I? I'm really not lying to you. Then tell me, what sort of sound can you hear? It sounds like guitar strings being plucked. It has a very unique rhythm to it. Cloud Hawk closed his eyes, carefully attuning himself to those sounds. Each piece of equipment has a different sound, a very strange song. How could a heathen wastelander abandoned by the gods possibly hear the song of my sacred relics? Not even legendary demon hunters have such an ability. Are you truly a wastelander? The blood-soaked queen stared intently at him, searching for a weakness or a hint of deception in his young face. In truth, her desire to kill him had not lessened in the slightest. If she saw the slightest hint of artifice, she would immediately attack without any hesitation or remorse. Cloudhawk nodded dumbly, a look of complete sincerity in his eyes. He didn't look like he was lying or holding anything back at all. However, he suddenly seemed to think of something as a look of dazzling excitement appeared in his eyes. He asked in a rather urgent manner, "You called me a heathen wastelander. That means there's more to this world than just the wastelands. Are there places outside the wastelands?" The blood-soaked queen said coldly, "That is none of your concern." "No. I must know. Please tell me, where did you come from?" Cloudhawk was so excited that he actually forgot his fear of her. "What is that place like? Does this kid not realize the situation he is in?" The blood-soaked queen truly was very fragile and weak right now, but if she wanted to get rid of this kid she would be able to do it with ease. However, when the kid stared at her she could see the hope and desire in his gaze. The emotions and dreams he held in his heart seemed to be pure and completely free of any doubt whatsoever, and his eyes were filled with the same resolute faith as that of the true believers when they bowed toward Sumeru, the mountain of the gods. A foul, despicable heathen who had been abandoned by the gods shouldn't be able to have a gaze like this, and yet, he was most surely destined to live and die within the wastelands. "I come from a land which is blessed by the light of the gods. The gods have created countless miracles in our world, and the land they have blessed is both fertile and bountiful, allowing those who live off that land to want for nothing. The gods bestowed us with intelligence and wisdom, letting all live peaceful lives of joy and leisure. There is no pain there, no sickness, no murder, that's it. That's the place. That's the place I've been dreaming of, ever since I was young." The place which Cloudhawk had fantasized about for so long really did exist. Cloudhawk felt dazed, but he also felt a ball of fire burning brightly within his chest. It was like he was a lost wanderer who had suddenly found his bearings again, as though a world of darkness had suddenly been cleft apart by a flicker of light. "Can I go there?" "Ha! In your dreams." The queen's response was like a bucket of ice water being poured over him, dousing his excitement. She glanced at the kid in front of her with a look of utter contempt. "This place is 1,000 miles away from Elysium. What makes you think you are strong enough to even get there? Putting that aside, what makes you think a lowly heathen like yourself would ever be permitted to bathe in the glory of the gods?" But her words had no effect. Cloudhawk had already decided that no matter how hard the journey was or how far he had to travel, he would still go to that distant place. "What of you?" Cloudhawk hesitated a short moment, then asked her the question. "You are from that place. Why did you abandon it to come to the—" Cloudhawk could tell that the queen was an extremely proud person. She was looking at Cloudhawk as though he was a rat she had just fished out of a sewer. If she hated the wastelands this much, if her world really was so perfect and pure, then what had driven her to abandon this land of the faithful, which she was so proud of? What had driven her to come here, to the dangerous, filthy, and barbaric wastelands, and stay here for over a year? Why had she chosen to live her life in this rat-infested outpost? But Cloudhawk fell silent before he could finish his question. A bone-piercing chill had just filled the small room, and he felt certain that the actual temperature had just dropped by several degrees. He sensed an all-consuming hatred radiating from the queen, an uncontrollable desire to kill that was mixed in with unspeakable grief. If Cloudhawk hadn't personally experienced this feeling, he never would have believed that this beautiful woman, as perfect as a work of art, was capable of radiating an aura that was every bit as baleful and murderous as the most savage of wasteland beasts. The blood-soaked queen's eyes had been completely filled with cold hatred. She ground her teeth, then said something which Cloudhawk did not comprehend whatsoever. "I am hunting a demon." Book 1, Chapter 31. A dangerous woman. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She had left those fertile lands which had been blessed by the gods, traveling alone. This was the reason why. She was only 16 years of age, but she had discarded her noble birth and her glorious future. This was the reason why. She had entered the gods-forsaken wastelands, spending more than a year of her life in this place. This was the reason why. The blood-soaked queen knew that her mission was a deadly one, but as a pious warrior, an exalted demon hunter, and a child of the glorious gods, she had long ago lost all her fear of death. What are you talking about? Cloudhawk had no idea what she was saying. He scratched his head. What's a demon? But as soon as he spoke, he regretted it. The queen turned a disdainful, appalled look towards him, as though she was staring at a mosquito that knew about nothing save buzzing in an irritating fashion. This feeling was quite an unpleasant one. The queen let out a cold snort. Wastelanders were ignorant and foolish beyond belief. They were faithless and had no sense of honor whatsoever. They knew not of the grace of the gods, nor did they know of the vileness of the demons. The queen felt that she was committing a great sin just speaking with such a heathen. It was as though conversing with him was a form of blasphemy against the divine spirits. But then, a feeling of exhaustion and powerlessness once more swept over her. She wasn't sure how much longer she would be able to remain standing. There was no way she could waste any more time here. Right now, she had to immediately leave this place. She turned her gaze towards the young wastelander, slight hesitation in her eyes. Mixed emotions flashed through her gaze before it finally turned as hard and cold as steel. Oh, fuck. She still wants to silence me. Cloudhawk hurriedly took a few steps back. What are you doing? The blood-soaked queen said coldly, I cannot let anyone find out about my injuries. Once this information is leaked, it is possible that the entire Black Flag outpost will be butchered almost immediately. I have to get rid of any chance of this happening, but fear not. You die in the service of the gods, and so I will pray for your soul and ensure that in your next life, you shall be born as one of the blessed citizens of the sacred Elysian lands. Are you serious? This is so completely unfair. The blood-soaked queen ignored his protestations, taking a single step forwards. Cloudhawk could clearly sense a type of ripple emerge from the queen's gloves and enter the air around him. When the ripples spread out, they clashed with the various material particles in the air, causing every single air particle to vibrate at a different frequency than before. That thrumming sound once more filled his ears. A flame appeared out of nowhere within the queen's hands. Cloudhawk was now thoroughly stunned. What type of power was this? Still, this didn't seem to be the right time to find out. Cloudhawk called out frantically, I saved your life. Are people from the Elysian lands all as ungrateful and treacherous as you? Is this how the gods you speak of teach you to treat people who helped you out? Thus saith the gods. The blood of the wastelands is most foul, and there is no need to show wastelanders any mercy at all. The queen's movements began to speed up. And I cannot take any risks. Her face was turning pale once more, and a few beads of sweat could be seen atop her fair, snow-white skin. She was doing her best to suppress the agony which was racking her body. As the ripples emanating from her gloves began to increase in power, the air around her began to vibrate more intensely than before, resulting in a heat wave emanating from around her. The runes on the queen's gloves were already lit up. She was ready to strike, but Cloudhawk wasn't going to just sit there and wait for death. As the queen reached out at frightening speeds to grab him, he suddenly shouted loudly, Sly Fox. Save me. The queen hesitated slightly. Sly Fox was a famous member of Black Flag Outpost, legendary for his craftiness and his schemes. Was he nearby? The queen was momentarily distracted by this possibility, and Cloudhawk seized the moment to pounce straight towards her like a leopard. Damn! What a sly fellow! The blood-soaked queen immediately reached out towards him once more. Her gloves held enough power to burn a man-eater into charcoal. If she so much as brushed this wastelander kid with it, he would instantly be burnt into a crisp. Cloud Hawk hurriedly dodged sideways, the gloves just barely missing his shoulders. The queen was every bit as skilled as Mad Dog, and she was possibly even stronger, otherwise, how could she have been able to receive that thunderous blow from the sweeper leader with her bare hand? However, she was so weak right now that her movements were far slower than normal. Bang! As Cloud Hawk dodged her attack, he punched her right in her perfect face. Hard. As someone who had grown up in the wastelands, he had never heard of the concept of chivalry. Who gave a fuck that she was a peerless beauty? The only thing Cloud Hawk knew and cared about was that she was trying to kill him. If he didn't fight as hard as he could, he'd definitely be the one to die, and so he really did hit her with everything he had, smacking her so hard that she saw stars. You bastard! The blood-soaked queen was filled with a towering rage. She had never imagined that this wastelander brat would be so alert and so audacious. She was a demon hunter, a warrior of the gods, and she had just been smacked in the face by an underage, half-grown wastelander boy. What an utter humiliation. That's what happens when you try to backstab people who helped you out. Cloud Hawk hadn't expected to actually land his attack, and his unexpected success was a huge morale boost to him. If this woman was gonna go after him, then he was going to knock her on her ass before she had a chance to recover her full strength. After knocking her out, he'd tie her up and try to figure out what to do with her. Cloud Hawk was not the spineless, cowardly type. How could a coward possibly spend all his time dreaming about leaving the wastelands and entering an unknown world? He aimed his second punch straight at the queen's tall, graceful nose. The blood-soaked queen dodged his attack, seeming to move slowly but somehow managing to just barely avoid his punch as she reached out with her right hand and latched onto Cloud Hawk's wrist. The queen had undergone formal combat training. Even in the bad shape she was currently in, she had more than enough oomph left to deal with a half-trained brat like this. Crap. Cloud Hawk was so terrified that he felt as though his soul was about to leave his body. The blood-soaked queen might have almost no power left, but what she did have was enough to finish him off. Cloud Hawk could clearly sense a ripple or a vibration emanate from her gloves, undulating in a serpentine fashion as it spread across his entire body. This power was capable of affecting every single tiny particle in his body, causing them to vibrate at a frequency which would generate tremendously high temperatures and heat. What type of attack was this? How was this attack formed? Cloud Hawk had no idea, nor did he care to find out at a time like this. He only had one thought in his mind. Oh, fuck. I'm gonna be charcoaled. But just as Cloud Hawk felt absolutely certain that his doom was nigh, he suddenly felt a resonant response coming from the stone around his neck. It sucked in all of the strange energy the blood-soaked queen was pouring into his body via her glove, almost like a sponge sucking in water. What's going on? Why is my energy disappearing as soon as it is going into the kid's body? The blood-soaked queen had never encountered something like this before, and for a moment she was caught completely off guard, and a heartbeat later, an ice-cold object was pressed straight against her chest. Don't move an inch. Cloud Hawk was holding a crude, ungainly shotgun in his hands. Although large beads of sweat had accumulated on his brows, his gaze was completely focused on the blood-soaked queen. I'm feeling really trigger-happy right now. The queen's gaze flickered a few times, then she said in a very calm voice, then go ahead and pull it. Cloud Hawk suddenly felt a sharp object pressing against his own chest. He glanced downwards, and his eyes bulged out. The queen had somehow pulled out a short dart without him even realizing it. If she pushed it forward by so much as half an inch, it would go straight into his heart. Cloud Hawk forced out a smile. That little thing. It might or might not be able to kill me, but I don't think you'll survive a shotgun blast to the face. The queen said coldly, I'm betting that your gun isn't loaded. Cloud Hawk's shotgun really wasn't loaded. The blood-soaked queen's guess was spot on, but Cloudhawk didn't let any of it show on his face or in his eyes. Instead, he applied a bit more pressure to the trigger, as though he truly was ready to fire at any moment. The blood-soaked queen had wanted to trick Cloudhawk into revealing something, but the Wastelander kid was much stronger mentally than she had imagined. Although she felt that it was likely that this shotgun had no pellets in it, given the situation she didn't dare to act rashly either. The queen wasn't afraid of dying. What she feared was dying without meaning. Cloudhawk was feeling nervous as well. He knew very well that he was putting on a false front right now. The queen might be very weak, but Cloudhawk didn't believe that he'd be able to beat her in a fight. A dying tiger was still a tiger, even in its death throes. It wouldn't be beaten by a mosquito, much less a half-grown one. What should he do? Cloudhawk had no idea as to how he should break this stalemate. But just as the tension was building to a crescendo, peals of laughter suddenly rang out from afar. The mercenaries had come back. Cloudhawk could hear Slyfox guffawing merrily, and some of the mercenaries were actually calling out to him. "Brat! Brat! Get out here! Come take a look at what we brought ya!" This time, it was the queen who turned pale. Slyfox really had arrived. He was an extraordinarily talented, sly, and vicious man. Given the shape the queen was in, there was no way she could fight him right now, much less the many other mercenaries Slyfox had brought with him. If she was discovered, she didn't even want to imagine what would happen. Damn! What was she to do? Was she really about to perish by the hands of these filthy wasteland heathens? Cloudhawk could see the blood draining from the queen's beautiful face, and he could also hear the footsteps of the mercenaries drawing closer and closer. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He knew exactly what type of person that fat bastard was. Slyfox was completely unscrupulous, vicious, and a notorious lecher. Who knew what would happen if the queen fell into his hands? Hey! Cloudhawk put down the shotgun. Hide! The queen was slightly startled. She had been planning to kill him, but he still wanted to help her. Cloudhawk stared at her. "I can't let you die yet. Hurry up and hide. If Slyfox sees you, you'll be screwed. He's a total pervert." Slyfox's lecherous nature wasn't exactly a secret, virtually everyone in the base knew it. But the problem was, Cloudhawk's tiny room had nothing more than a shabby bed and a rickety table, and those things took up virtually all of his space. There was nowhere to hide someone. Onto the bed. By now, the mercenary footsteps were coming from just a few meters away. Cloudhawk had no time to consider anything else. He suddenly pushed the queen onto his bed, covered her with his grungy blankets, then lay down on the bed as well. The bed was a tiny one, and so the two were forced to squeeze together to fit on it. How could she possibly be hidden on the bed? They'd have to be blind not to notice her. But the queen had no time to react, because the door to the room had just been kicked open. A heartbeat later, Slyfox swaggered straight inside. Cloudhawk hurriedly squeezed closer towards her. The blood-soaked queen was actually a bit taller than him, and her figure was both slender and curvaceous, her form both soft and firm. Cloudhawk had the clear feeling that he was lying next to a female leopard that was capable of exploding with tremendous power at any moment. This was the first time for him to be in such close contact with a woman. Cloudhawk felt nervous, but he also felt some other strange feelings rippling through his heart. This was a completely new sensation for him, but he was in no mood to savor it. The woman was simply too dangerous. She suddenly snaked her arm out around him, pressing herself tightly against him from behind. It looked as though she was embracing him under the covers, a very intimate and loving gesture. This was the first time for the half-grown Cloudhawk to experience the feeling of a young, lithe, and beautiful woman pressing against him, but he had no time to enjoy it, because the queen had just pressed something cold, slick, and sharp directly against his throat. If he so much as moved the wrong way, something very, very bad was going to happen to him. This crazy bitch still doesn't trust me. Book 1, Chapter 32 Purposeful Poisoning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fuck, kid, why haven't you lit the lamps? Sly Fox boomed loudly as he squeezed his fat figure into the small room. Cloud Hawk could sense the softness of the queen's body, the warmth of her breath against his neck, and the hardness of the sharp weapon her long, slender hands were pressing against his neck from beneath the grungy covers. Shocked. Horrified. Tense. Cloud Hawk didn't know how to describe his current state of mind. It was an inexplicable, indescribable type of sensation, and even he didn't know what he was feeling right now. Sly Fox let out a rather irritated snort. Are you dead? Say something. And why are you still on the bed? Get your ass up. What do you want? Cloud Hawk didn't dare to show that anything was off, much less leave the bed. He said in an intentionally feeble voice, I need to rest. Stop bothering me. Fuck that. You just got nicked a few times. Since when have you been such a wimp? Don't you want your share of the spoils? Sly Fox walked over, tossing a large silver coat of fur over towards Cloud Hawk. It was actually a very complete wolf pelt. Judging from the size of the thing, it had to have been skinned from the alpha rot wolf. Check it out. This is a really great piece of fur, it's both warm and tough. You can even make it into a suit of top-notch leather armor. Man, you really should be thanking your lucky stars. Oh yeah, you can keep the shotgun too. Consider that part of your spoils. What the hell? These things belong to me to begin with. Cloud Hawk had been the one to kill the alpha rot wolf, and he had found the shotgun on the field of battle. The fat bastard was acting like he was giving Cloud Hawk some nice gifts when in reality he was just giving Cloud Hawk things that were rightfully his to begin with. Don't be a brat. Do you think you would have gotten anything at all if I hadn't fought over them for you? Hey, I'm talking to you. Why the fuck are you still lying? Sly Fox's words suddenly trailed off as he noticed what was happening on the bed. Although the room was very dim and he couldn't make out many details, he could still tell that someone was lying next to Cloud Hawk, most likely a woman. Judging from her posture, she was cuddling the little bastard. A perplexed yet amused look suddenly appeared on Sly Fox's face. Oh ho ho. So you've finally learned to have some fun, eh? Hidin' a woman in your room, let me take a look at her. They'd been discovered. The queen tensed even further, pressing the dart slightly harder against Cloud Hawk's neck. Cloud Hawk felt as though the dart was about to stab straight through his skin. He immediately began to sweat heavily as he called out, who I'm sleeping with is none of your business. I'm naked. Get the fuck outta here. Ha. No wonder you are in such a pissy mood. I get pissed too when someone interrupts me mid-shag. We're all men. I get it. But you know, that woman of yours seems to have a really nice body. How does she look? Is she a slut? Let me take a look. Hell, I'll teach you a few moves on the spot. I'm a grandmaster in this area, you know. The queen began to tremble, her rage and her frustration having reached a boiling point. As for Cloud Hawk, he felt so frightened that his soul was at the verge of fleeing from his body. This fat fucking bastard was about to get him killed. He hurriedly shouted, fat ass, are you trying to steal my woman from me? What? You know that good Sanufa, do you have any idea how many women I got? Why the fuck would I try to take yours, you brat? Sly Fox seemed to have been truly affronted by this suggestion, and he instantly started to curse at Cloud Hawk. I was plannin' to invite you to the banquet we're holdin', but since you're busy dealin' with this woman I'll leave you to it. Let's get the hell outta here, guys. Still grumbling and cursing, Sly Fox left the room. The mercenaries outside all began to let out mocking shouts. So the kid found a woman for himself. My mind is completely blown. Quite a few of them craned to stare inwards with depraved looks in their eyes, curious as to what type of woman this half-grown brat could possibly find. Stop staring. He's probably a virgin. How the hell is he gonna stay hard with all y'all staring at him? Sly Fox let out a loud guffaw. Plenty of women in the world. The mercenaries roared with laughter as they left. With the mercenaries gone, Cloudhawk let out a relieved sigh. Moments later, he tensed up again. He immediately said to the woman behind him, "Don't get mad at me. I just wanted to get them out of here as soon as I could. I'm sorry if I offended you." The queen's hand suddenly slumped down powerlessly. She made no response at all. Cloudhawk couldn't help but use his elbow to nudge her slightly. They left already. The queen slowly began to curl into a fetal position, still not saying a single word. Something was wrong. Cloudhawk turned to look at her. Only now did Cloudhawk realize that her face was ashen, and that her lips were blue. A few strands of her black hair had been plastered to her face by sweat, and her entire body was trembling slightly. It looked as though she was gripped by tremendous pain. Is the injury acting up again? Cloudhawk hurriedly lit a lamp, only to see that her teeth were tightly clenched. She clearly wasn't in the mood to worry about the rather disrespectful words he had said earlier. Cloudhawk looked at her closely. "Where were you hurt?" Cloudhawk swept the queen's lithesome form with his gaze. He noticed that there were a number of holes in the front of her clothes, and he immediately pulled them open, revealing a number of wounds across her taut, firm belly. The wounds weren't that deep, but they looked badly infected. The once white skin around the wounds had already turned dark and purple. What was going on here? Crack. The queen delivered a stinging slap to his face. She glared at him, forcing words out of her gritted teeth. "Take your filthy paws off of me. You've clearly been poisoned, and quite heavily. If this goes untreated, all of your internal organs will rot." Cloudhawk finally understood why the blood-soaked queen was so weak. A resigned yet curious look appeared in his eyes. "But it doesn't look like you were bitten by an animal. What happened?" The blood-soaked queen growled out, "None of your business. Fuck off. Why are you such a pain to work with?" Cloudhawk was starting to grow pissed off as well. "I saved you. Twice. Not only are you being an ingrate, you are acting like an asshole. Oh, right, you also tried to kill me. For fuck's sake, if it wasn't because you know of the world beyond the wastelands, do you really think I'd be working so fucking hard to save you?" The queen trembled with rage. "You, just shut up. You won't be able to hang on for much longer. If you don't get treatment, you'll die." Cloudhawk shook his head. "I swear to you, if you die in my place, I'll have no choice but to strip you naked, eviscerate you, then stuff you like a doll. Given how pretty you are, you'll make a lovely souvenir. We'll stick you right in front of the outpost for everyone to see. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't dare. Why the hell wouldn't I?" The queen was noticeably growing weaker and weaker, and so Cloudhawk was becoming more and more daring. No matter what, he wouldn't let this woman die here. He needed, to learn a way out of the wastelands. "If you don't want to die, then please work with me, alright." The blood-soaked queen let out a few rattling coughs, a few flecks of blood flying out of her mouth. "Oh, shit. This is bad. She's not gonna actually die here, is she?" The queen shut her eyes. After taking a few deep breaths, she opened her eyes again. No emotions could be seen in her gaze, and she now looked as calm and collected as ever. She said in a cold, calm voice, "3 days ago, I was hunting after the demon. I found the place he was hiding, but accidentally revealed myself and ended up being attacked by his minions. I wiped them all out, but I paid a price, and I was also struck by a poison dart." As she spoke, she handed over the short dart she had been clenching this entire time. "This was the thing you were using to threaten me earlier, right?" Cloudhawk accepted the poison dart. It was slick, barbed, and extremely sharp. Clearly, this was a high-quality weapon. It was also smeared with something that was dark green in color, and a few flakes of dried blood could be seen on its surface. No ordinary wastelander would ever have access to such a weapon. Fuck. That was close. The queen really was a vicious schemer. If she had so much as nicked him, he probably would be a goner by now. With so many of his minions killed, the demon naturally found out that I was here and hunting for him. However, he doesn't know much about me, nor does he know if there are other demon hunters working by my side. Given how slippery and crafty demons are, he won't reveal himself unless absolutely necessary. That's why he's chosen to watch from the shadows while sending out others to test me. The blood-soaked queen's voice turned deep and dark. The sweeper leader you saw earlier today was one of his minions. Their real target wasn't the outpost, it was me. Although he had guessed at this long ago, he still felt shocked upon hearing his suspicions confirmed. No wonder. You clearly were able to defeat him with ease, but you insisted on killing him in the most dramatic fashion possible. Cloudhawk suddenly understood everything. You were putting on a false front. It was so obvious, even I could tell. Do you really think you fooled him? The queen stuttered slightly. She had felt certain that she had put on a flawless performance, revealing no weaknesses at all. How was it that the kid was able to see through everything? But she had most likely indeed been able to deceive her foe. Otherwise, there was no way things would have ended that easily. You still haven't told me what a demon is. Demons are cruel, savage, vicious, venomous creatures. They are the source of all sin, the cause of all calamities, and they are the enemies of mankind. As a demon hunter blessed by the grace of the gods, my principal responsibility is to hunt down demons. Honorless, faithless heathens like you could never understand. The blood-soaked queen slowly closed her eyes as she continued to speak. I have no idea how strong that demon was. I don't even know if the play I put on today was able to fool him. You've saved me twice, so I'll give you fair warning, leave this place immediately. Cloudhawk was stunned. What? Black Flag Outpost is currently the most dangerous place in the wastelands. Its very existence is balanced on a steel wire, and the slightest wind could blow it off. The demon holds tremendous power in these wastelands. For him, destroying Black Flag Outpost is a very easy task. It might happen tomorrow. It might happen right now. The blood-soaked queen opened her dark, jewel-like eyes again, a steady look in her gaze. If you leave right now, you might be able to escape. Flee, as fast as you can. Cloudhawk still had no idea what a demon was. Still, there was no reason for this female demon hunter to lie to him. The fact remained that she had been heavily injured by the minions of this demon, and she hadn't even been able to face it in person. This meant that there was an enormous gap in power between this young demon hunter and the demon she spoke of. Black Flag Outpost might truly be in danger. Cloudhawk swallowed hard. Fuck. I can feel a chill going down my spine. But, why haven't you fled yourself? Given how badly hurt you are, there's no way you can win. Flee. The blood-soaked queen forced herself to sit up, leaning against the headboard of the bed. She was extremely weak, but she still possessed an aura of forlorn beauty. Her eyes were filled with ardent faith and firm resolution, as well a look of absolute disdain for the ignorant child before her. How can a wastelander and possibly understand the faith and resolve of a demon hunter? All right. I get it already. I'm an ant, a bug. You are a noble demon hunter, a royal queen. Everyone gets it already. Do you really have to repeat this crap over and over? Cloudhawk was getting rather impatient. No matter what, the first thing we have to do is to treat your wounds. There's a guy outside named Mantis. You should have heard of him before, right? He loves to spend his time studying venomous insects and various poisons. I'm sure he'd be able to help treat you. How about I call him over and have him treat you in secret? Unacceptable. The blood-soaked queen replied coldly, no one in the wastelands can be trusted. You can't let anyone see me in the state I'm in. This woman is crazy stubborn. What the hell am I supposed to do? Judging from the condition she was in, the poison shouldn't be too dangerous, otherwise, there was no way she could have lasted for so long. Poisons meant to be applied to weapons were generally formulated to be long-lasting rather than potent. There were some types of poison that could almost instantly kill a person, but they were only potent for very brief periods of time. When a battle suddenly erupted, there was often no time to properly apply poison to your weapons. Cloudhawk played with the dart for a few moments when suddenly, something clicked. I have an idea. What is your ID? Halfway through her words, the queen fell silent. Her eyes bulged out as something completely unexpected happened. Cloudhawk suddenly stabbed himself in the arm with the poison dart, leaving behind a bloody wound on it. The queen stared at him, completely dumbfounded. What are you? Just wait here. Cloudhawk was in such pain that sweat was pouring down his head, but he still squeezed out a smile. He seemed quite proud of this genius idea of his. I'll be back shortly and I'll save you. As soon as he finished talking, he pushed the door open and left. Help! Help! I've been poisoned. Where's Mantis? Where's Mantis? I need him to save me. The queen just stared blankly as he charged out, not sure if she should laugh or cry. What the hell was wrong with the kid? Book 1, Chapter 33 Treatment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What gave Cloudhawk the courage to do such a thing? Sheer, absolute ignorance. As Cloudhawk saw it, if the queen was able to survive multiple days without dying, the poison couldn't be all that powerful, right? He was a recovery metahuman. How could he possibly lose to a woman in this area? But soon, Cloudhawk realized that he was wrong. Completely, breathtakingly wrong. Less than 5 minutes after the poison dart nicked his skin, he realized that he had completely lost all feeling in his entire arm. Large patches of skin had already begun to turn purplish-black. Cloudhawk was scared out of his wits, and he frantically half-ran, half-stumbled straight towards Mantis' workshop. Mantis was in the middle of inspecting a new specimen. He adjusted his spectacles, cold light reflecting off the glass. How exactly did you end up being poisoned by a twin-headed viper? Cloudhawk pretended to be completely confused as he vigorously shook his head. I must have been ambushed by one of the sweepers during that fight. I didn't notice anything at first, but now my entire arm is numb. Mantis gave him a deep, long glance. Really? Why are you staring at me like that? The look was making Cloudhawk's hair stand on end. Are you gonna save me or not? Without saying another word, Mantis went to work. He began to mix together a number of strange medicinal fluids, producing 2 little jars of fluid which he handed over to Cloudhawk. The first should be smeared over the wound itself, ensuring that it doesn't fester. The second should be taken orally to flush the poison from your body. You'll recover in 1 day. The queen's face was ashen, and she lay curled on the bed. Her crow-black hair was plastered to her face by her sweat, and her brows were knitted in pain. This dominating woman, who had been able to slay a 3-meter-tall man-eater with a single slap, was now completely powerless. In fact, she looked rather sad and pitiable. When Cloudhawk pushed open the door and ran inside, she didn't react at all. Had she passed out again? Even if she hadn't, she was clearly in bad shape. You can't die. Even if you do die, you can't die here. I haven't asked you any of the questions I want to ask yet. Cloudhawk began to clumsily strip off her outer garments. Just as his hands touched her skin, her eyelashes fluttered slightly. A freezing look was in her eyes as she glared at him. She was using her gaze to warn him that he was making a dangerous decision. When Cloudhawk saw the look in her eyes, he felt his heart clench in fear. Even though she was extremely weak, her glare still contained a mesmerizing, terrifying quality to it. She was an powerless yet peerless beauty. She was also an indomitable, fearless warrior. These two things should have been completely contradictory, but they had somehow been joined together in her. What type of faith could produce someone like her? I thought you passed out. Cloudhawk awkwardly pulled his hands back, then showed off the 2 bottles he was holding. I have the antidote here. Since you haven't passed out, you can go ahead and treat yourself. This woman was not only powerful, she also had a terrible temper. Cloudhawk was terrified that she might slap him into mincemeat, and so he didn't dare to touch her. Instead, he obediently handed over the 2 bottles to her. The queen felt both numb and powerless. She no longer had the strength to move at all. She tried to rise, only to discover that she was unable to do so. After numerous attempts, she finally gave up. Cloudhawk was puzzled. What's wrong? The queen gave Cloudhawk a weighing look. Although he was a contemptible wastelander, he looked rather handsome and there didn't seem to be any ulterior motives visible in his eyes. You do it. She had been born into a noble clan, was a proud hunter of demons, and had an innate sense of superiority over the wastelanders. As a result, she spoke in a very imperious manner, almost as though she was ordering a servant to do something. Didn't really matter though. Cloudhawk didn't mind her attitude. He blinked a few times, then mumbled softly, I can help you if you want, but if I accidentally see something I shouldn't see or touch something I shouldn't touch, I'm worried that you'll gouge my eyes out or chop my hands off. I really don't want to do this. His concerns weren't completely unfounded. Given the queen's personality, she was entirely capable of doing such things. The queen gave him a hard glare. If looks could kill, Cloudhawk would have died 100 times over. Humph. I'm not as fussy as you think. I won't do anything to you as long as you don't try anything funny. L.RG, fine, then. Cloudhawk walked over rather reluctantly. He first helped her strip off her outer garments, revealing the tight, form-fitting black clothes underneath. This was a suit of armor that had been created from some sort of incredibly durable leather. The workmanship was exquisite and meticulous, there was no way something like this could have been made in the wastelands. I have to take off this thing as well. Shut up and do it. The queen's words were tough and disdainful, but her face was turning slightly flushed. She closed her eyes, not wanting to see anything further. This actually made Cloudhawk feel even more uneasy. She wouldn't kill him afterwards to silence him, would she? Still, there was nothing else he could do. Cloudhawk carefully unfastened her leather armor, but it was impossible for him to avoid all contact with her when he did this. Thanks to his control meta powers, Cloudhawk could clearly sense that her entire body would turn tense whenever he touched her. Clearly, this woman wasn't as open-minded about being touched by a man as she had claimed. Most of the leather armor had been removed, leaving behind a black undergarment that covered her upper chest. The rest of her body was now completely bare. Cloudhawk had never touched a woman before today, much less seen such a flawless form. Every inch of her body seemed to have been perfectly sculpted and molded. As for the black chest bindings, they were extremely tight but unable to completely disguise her curves. Watch your eyes. The queen's own eyes remained shut as she issued this warning. Cloudhawk quickly came back to his senses and hurriedly began to treat her wounds. Her injuries were even more severe than he had imagined, her side-belly had almost turned completely black by now. Cloudhawk couldn't even imagine what sort of method she had used to contain the damage to this region, preventing it from spreading even further. Cloudhawk had learned a few things from Mantis, and as a result his movements were very clean and quick. He first used a scalpel to cut off the festering flesh around the wounds, letting the clotted blood flow out. He then poured some of the medicinal fluids over her wounds. The queen furrowed her brows in pain, perhaps because the fluid stung, but didn't say a thing. She really was a tough woman. Cloud Hawk himself was about to jump up and down from the pain he felt when smearing the medicine over her wounds. You won't be able to recover from these wounds in just 1 or 2 days. Cloud Hawk bandaged her wounds with cloth, then placed the remainder of the medicine to one side. Thankfully, I'm a recovery metahuman and as such can heal quickly. I didn't need to use too much medicine for myself. All the rest is for you to use. The blood-soaked queen had felt utterly humiliated by this entire process, but she had been out of options. She tightly clenched her fists. Thankfully, the kid hadn't tried to cop a feel in the process, otherwise, she really would have chopped him until he turned into mincemeat. As for the medicine, it really did seem to be effective. Her pain was already beginning to subside, and she immediately felt a sense of relief. I know Mantis' workshop like the back of my hand, and I memorized all the ingredients he used to create the antidote. If this isn't enough, I'll go back and steal some more for you. Cloud Hawk helped the queen put on her garments once more. In short, don't worry. You'll recover from this. The queen glanced at him rather unhappily. Stop chattering. Man, she really is tough to deal with. Cloud Hawk shook his head, then turned to leave. The blood-soaked queen instantly felt puzzled. Where are you going? Cloud Hawk said helplessly, Your Royal Highness, if I wanted to do something bad to you I wouldn't have wasted all this time helping you. Can you cut it with all your suspicions? Just rest up. I'll be back soon. You. The blood-soaked queen's eyes narrowed into slits. How dare this wastelander act like this towards her? This was preposterously unacceptable. Roughly 15 minutes later, Cloud Hawk returned with a large pile of items in his arms. He had a few bottles of clean water, a few chunks of meat jerky, some medicine for puncture wounds, some freshly washed and cleaned bandages, and various other instruments needed to treat injuries. Cloud Hawk picked up one of the chunks of jerky, chewing and swallowing while mumbling from the corner of his mouth, You were hurt pretty badly. I figured you'd need some time to recover, so I grabbed some things we'll need. Cloud Hawk finished off the chunk of meat in just a few moments, and right at this moment, a gurgling sound could be heard. The sound was very soft, but it was extremely noticeable given how silent the room was. The sound had come from the queen's belly. She had been lying there like a jade statue, her eyes closed as she rested, but now, her beautiful face almost instantly turned beet red. The redness stretched all the way down her neck and up her ears, making her look rather adorable. Awkward. Really, really awkward. She had actually embarrassed herself in front of this heathen bastard. Oh gods, I want to find a hole to hide in. Cloud Hawk continued to chew on his food as he mumbled, You hungry too, eh? She let out a hard snort, not saying a word. No shit. Are you trying to piss me off on purpose? If he knew she was hungry, why couldn't he just hand her some food? Was he waiting for her to ask? The queen was a very prideful person, she would rather starve to death than lower her head and ask a heathen wastelander for food. Wait a sec. Cloud Hawk poured some water into a bowl, then tore off a few strips of jerky and placed it into the bowl along with some bread. Moments later, he went to his doorway and lit a chunk of wood on fire, holding the bowl over it to warm it up. Only then did he bring the soup back to the queen. Your body is pretty weak right now. This will help you get better faster. The queen stared blankly at the warm bread-jerky soup, a few mixed emotions flickering through her clear, limpid eyes. I know you are used to better treatment, but this is the best food I have on me. In fact, I actually saved it up over the past few days as a special treat for myself. Just bear with it for now, alright? Need me to feed you? No need. The queen had a rather complex look on her face as she took the crude, battered bowl into her hands. She took a small sip in a very delicate manner, allowing small chunks of rat jerky and hard bread to flow into her stomach along with the hot water. It really didn't taste that good, but she could feel some strength returning to her. Cloud Hawk turned away as she ate, busying himself with other tasks. But right at this moment, a whispered soft voice came from right behind him. Thank you. Cloudhawk was stunned. Was he hearing things? He turned around, a confused look on his face. What's that? You say something. Are you deaf? Fuck off. The blood-soaked queen's glare was so sharp, he felt as though it could chop him up into 3 parts. Don't get mad. I just never imagined that a savage woman like you would ever say, thank you, to anyone. I wasn't trying to make fun of you, honest. Cloudhawk couldn't help but let out 2 chortles. By now, he was certain that she was no longer as guarded against him as she had been. The blood-soaked queen, that sounds like a nickname. You should have a real name, right? Can you tell me? The queen finished the rest of the soup. I'm tired. Oh. I'm tired too, actually, but there's only one bed. I guess we'll just have to squeeze together. Cloudhawk had meant it as a joke, and the results were entirely predictable. The queen's eyes glared murder at him. He hurriedly said, but you know, it's too tight a fit. I'll sleep on the ground. That's more like it. The queen said not a word of thanks as she lay back down on the bed. She didn't even answer any of my questions. Forget it. No rush. Cloudhawk blew out the lamp, made himself a bed of straw, then covered himself with the wolf pelt which Sly Fox had brought him. My name is Cloudhawk. The queen still didn't respond. Man, she sure is unfriendly. I guess she really doesn't like wastelanders. Cloudhawk didn't say anything further. To be honest, none of this really mattered. The wolf pelt stank terribly, but it was also very warm. It had been 2 days and 2 nights since he had last rested, and he quickly drifted off into the sweet land of slumber. Book 1, Chapter 34 The Outside World. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What were the wastelands like? They were filled with rot, filth, violence, barbarianism, and corruption. As for the wastelands, they served as the claws of the demons. They were born with sin in their blood, and were both hideous and revolting. This was why they had been banned from the Elysiums. The blood-soaked queen was an incredibly devout and pious believer. She would never view wastelanders as humans, and it was not forbidden for Elysians to show wastelanders any pity or mercy. They would be profaning the almighty gods if they did. But, this Cloudhawk seemed to be different. Over the course of the next 2 days, the blood-soaked queen gradually discovered that this wastelander youth didn't have too many bad habits. After poisoning himself with the dart in order to save her, he gave her the majority of what little food he had each day. He attentively helped her treat her injuries. When faced with her arrogance and her powerlessness, he didn't put on a show of being reluctantly tolerant of her either. He truly was an extremely rare breed of wastelander. By now, the blood-soaked queen's attitude towards him had improved immensely. She was now strong enough to kill him with ease if she so chose. Should she? Should she get rid of the kid? Forget it. The kid had unique sensory abilities. He might be able to help serve as an early alert system for her. If she let him stay alive, he might be of use to her in her mission. Fighting against that demon was more important than anything else. The blood-soaked queen's desire to kill him gradually faded, allowing Cloudhawk to finally relax. Although she seemed cruel and savage, she was actually a very pure and sensitive person. She covered herself with a hard spiked shell of ice, but that was all for the sake of protecting herself in these cannibalistic wastelands. If she didn't force herself to be as tough as the wastelanders, how could she possibly hold them down? In addition, the blood-soaked queen was a woman of many mysteries. She had come to the wastelands from a faraway land, all for the sake of hunting down one of those so-called demons. This couldn't be simply due to her calling as a demon hunter, right? The hatred she had accidentally revealed the last time he had talked to her about it was proof that this was a mission of revenge. The blood-soaked queen was here as an avenger, but Cloudhawk didn't dare ask her too much about herself. When Cloudhawk looked at this tough, pious warrior woman, he felt as though he could see the glory, the sincerity, the steadfastness, and the virtuousness of the Elysians. They were worlds apart from the brutish, twisted, brutal, and berserk wastelanders. This only made Cloudhawk long to visit the Elysian lands even more. But of course, the blood-soaked queen wasn't exactly easy to befriend. She was filled with a sense of superiority which Cloudhawk did not understand, and she seemed to feel as though living for a few days with a wastelander like Cloudhawk was the greatest stain and blot on her honor which she had ever experienced. It was as though the noble daughter of an empress had somehow been forced to live in a beggar's shack and share his food for days on end, and the fact that the beggar had saved her life was the worst part of it. If it wasn't for the fact that she wanted to recover as quickly as possible in order to fight her mortal foe, there was no way she would have accepted such humiliation. But the blood-soaked queen's wariness continued to slowly lessen by the day, while Cloudhawk slowly grew more and more daring. Nagging, whining, pleading, he used every option at his disposal to try and find out more about the outside world. He really was like a mosquito that buzzed around her all day long. How could the blood-soaked queen not find him irritating? Still, compared to the other wastelanders, the kid had his own good traits, such as his stubbornness and his tenacity. Although he was laughably foolish and ignorant, he really was an exceptional person for a wastelander. She had never before encountered any wastelander who dreamed of leaving the wastelands. As a result, every so often she would answer one of his questions. Based on the scant bits of information she provided, Cloudhawk slowly began to gain a brand new understanding of the outside world. Roughly 95% of the world was covered by the wastelands, but there really were blessed lands. Only, they were all very, very far away, with the nearest one still being around 2,000 kilometers away. The vast majority of wastelands vehicles rarely traveled more than 150 kilometers in any direction. You'd run out of supplies and run out of fuel, and there would be no information about the area you were in. You'd be swarmed by beasts, robbed by men, choked by sand, or perhaps fall into one of those terrifying regions where space and time were both twisted. There were countless unknown variables in any long-distance journey, and thus not even the most experienced of demon hunters would dare claim that they could definitely traverse the vast wastelands by themselves. A weak wastelander who spent all his days dreaming about leaving the wastelands was nothing more than a fool. The blood-soaked queen didn't even try to disguise her disdain for him, often throwing a few mocking words his way as she pointed out how foolish and unrealistic his dreams were. Even assuming this weak wastelander youth really was somehow able to survive his trip into Elysian lands, did he really think they would let him in? Him, a low-born heathen. But Cloudhawk didn't let himself be discouraged by her words. In fact, he only grew even more excited. The Elysian lands might be very far away, but they weren't unreachable. Having a goal to work for was better than just wandering about, completely lost. Even though he knew his chances were slim, he'd still go fight for them. As for whether or not the Elysians would accept him into Elysium, he didn't care about that at all. The kid's hopeless. The blood-soaked queen eventually got bored of mocking him. What was the relationship between the gods and the demons? Between the wastelands and the Elysian lands? Cloudhawk still didn't have a clear answer to this question, but he was slowly beginning to understand. The Elysian lands were paradise, blessed with prosperity and filled with piety and faith. The gods had bestowed endless fertility onto the Elysian lands, gracing them with countless crops which permitted all the Elysians to eat to their heart's content. The gods had blessed the Elysian lands with special livestock that grew very rapidly, allowing all Elysians to be able to drink the most delicious of cow's milk. As for the Elysian children, the gods had blessed them with inconceivable power and wisdom. The gods had brought order and peace, casting all calamities, illnesses, and pains away from their Elysians. They even bestowed mighty artifacts and special powers upon their demon hunters, then established vast cities and marvelous temples through which they wrought the most inconceivable of miracles. Every single person living in Elysian lands was filled with nothing but the most absolute of respect towards the gods. As for the demons, As their name suggested, they were freaks and abominations that were completely antithetical to the gods. They were incredibly brutal and savage, filled with naked ambition and diabolical cunning. On numerous occasions, they had very nearly caused the destruction of the human race. It was only thanks to the guidance and the assistance of the gods that humanity had defeated the demons. Thanks to the many elysiums which the gods had established, tens of millions of humans were able to live in peace and prosperity. The rest of the world, however, was consumed by the wastes. The wastelands had previously been dominated by the demons, and the ancestors of the wastelanders had supposedly been the servants of the demons. This was why wastelanders were usually hideous and brutal, and why they were not accepted into Elysian lands. But that chaotic era of war had ended long ago, with the demons having all but vanished without a trace. The gods had unified the world, making it orderly and peaceful. Still, there were still a few demons hiding in the various corners of the world who foolishly sought to cause trouble, fomenting one vile scheme after another. The League of Demon Hunters had been established to put an end to their wicked sins. Demon hunters were the most elite warriors of the entire human race. They were all sincere, devout warriors of the gods who had been bestowed with special powers, and as the title implied, their divine mission was to hunt demons. Each time the blood-soaked queen mentioned the demon hunters, a look of indisguisable pride appeared within her eyes. She had been born into an entire clan of demon hunters, and she was the youngest and most talented demon hunter of her generation. Her father, her grandfather, her uncles, all of them were glorious demon hunters. Cloudhawk shook the bottle of medicine, then shrugged his shoulders helplessly. "We're out of medicine again. I'll have to steal a bit more from Mantis' workshop." By now, the blood-soaked queen had recovered approximately 30 to 40% of her power. She no longer needed to fear anyone in the outpost, but of course, she wasn't anywhere near strong enough to hunt demons yet. BL.net The blood-soaked queen had yet to personally battle against any demon. When demon hunters went hunting, they generally moved in packs. The blood-soaked queen had traveled all by herself to this place, so deep within the wastelands. Although she was undoubtedly brave, she was also undoubtedly rash. As for her injuries, they would take at least 2 weeks to heal. Her hope was that the enemy would give her at least that period of time to recover. The blood-soaked queen rose to her feet, preparing to leave. "Where are you going? You are still injured. You can't leave yet." Cloudhawk hurriedly moved to stop her. He still didn't have the answers to his questions yet. If he let this opportunity slip away, he would probably never have another opportunity again. "There's no need for me to continue hiding in this shabby room any further." The blood-soaked queen had already made up her mind. "I admit that you were of assistance to me. The warriors of the gods do not forget those who provided them succor. I can agree to any one request of yours, so long as it isn't an excessive one. Speak." Cloudhawk was instantly stunned. The blood-soaked queen was promising to help him out with a request. What incredible luck! If Cloudhawk so chose, he would consign any person in the outpost to death, who could possibly be a match for this freak in front of him. But of course, Cloudhawk would never waste an opportunity like this on something so pointless. "I want to leave the wastelands." "Impossible." The blood-soaked queen was quite displeased. She had already told him numerous times that this was impossible, and yet the kid continued to persist. Cloudhawk frowned, a frustrated look on his face. He thought the question over, then came to a decision. "Then I want to learn demon hunter techniques. Can you teach them to me?" The blood-soaked queen didn't understand. "Why would you want to learn that?" "I just do." Cloudhawk said firmly, "Maybe I can become a demon hunter as well." The queen couldn't help but let out a laugh. They had spent several days living together, but this was the first time Cloudhawk had witnessed her smiling, and it truly stunned him. It was as though an iceberg that had remained frozen for 10 millennia had suddenly thawed and melted, revealing the dazzling, lively, and beautiful soul hidden underneath it. For a moment, he was dazed by it. You obstinate, daydreaming fool. The queen's face quickly hardened once more. She said in her customary, cold voice, I can teach you, yes, but I have to warn you right now that if you don't have the necessary talent or the blessings of the gods, these techniques will be completely useless to you, even if by some miracle you actually manage to master them. Cloudhawk revealed a look of absolute ecstasy. He really hadn't expected her to agree, but she really had. I don't care. I just want the chance to learn it. If you truly are going to be so stubborn as to try and learn demon hunter techniques, then I'll teach you. However, I'll only teach you for a day. The blood-soaked queen put her silver mask back on her face, and her voice became hoarse and grating once more. Come find me when you are ready. After speaking, she departed from the room. Cloudhawk just stood there dumbly, staring as her willowy form departed. Book 1, Chapter 35 The Conviction of the Week. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Nightfall. Training had concluded for the day, and the mercenaries had split off into small groups in search of entertainment. Cloudhawk, however, was stealthily creeping towards Mantis' workshop. He wanted to seize advantage of this period of time, when there was no one around, to rifle through Mantis' stash and pilfer a few jars of medicine. He remembered how Mantis had mixed the various restoratives and medicinal fluids, and he was sure he could do the same. Freaking Mantis. He keeps on ordering me around all the time. He can just consider this stuff my salary. Cloudhawk wasn't a saint who had come to save the masses, nor was he a gentleman who followed a code of chivalry. Black Flag Outpost was about to face a powerful enemy. This was what Cloudhawk was really concerned about. The stronger the queen was, the safer the outpost would be, and the safer the outpost would be, the safer Cloudhawk would be. Besides, befriending the queen was a form of investment that might pay off in the future. He might be able to learn a few things from her. All done. Cloudhawk smugly cradled the 2 jars of medicine and prepared to leave. Right as he turned, he suddenly saw a tall, skinny figure standing directly behind him. The man stood there like a wraith, making no sound at all and covered in the darkness of dusky night. He had a silent, sinister aura about him, but no expressions could be seen on his face. His spectacles, however, gleamed with cold light. Cloudhawk nearly jumped into the air with fright. Are you a freaking ghost? When had this guy appeared? Why hadn't Cloudhawk noticed anything at all? Mantis turned his gaze to the jars of medicine Cloudhawk was holding. Cloudhawk had been caught red-handed, and there was no place for him to hide. All he could do was come up with a frantic, far-fetched excuse. I feel like I'm still not completely healed yet, so I thought I'd grab a bit more medicine. Don't be so stingy, alright. Mantis' face remained blank and impassive, like an ever-frozen piece of ice. There was no way to tell whether he was angry or not. Swoosh. Mantis took a single step forwards, and as he did an ice-cold scalpel suddenly flew out from between his fingers. Cloudhawk's eyes widened. Holy shit. It's just some medicine. Are you seriously gonna kill me over it? Mantis stalked forwards, as agile and as silent as a cat, his movements ghostly and unfathomable. The icy scalpel kissed Cloudhawk's ears as it flew past his head, and then Mantis walked straight past Cloudhawk, not even glancing at the boy as he returned to his usual workstation. Mantis put on his gloves, picked up his tools, lit a lamp, then began to carry out his normal work with his usual unflappability. Cloudhawk's clothes were completely matted with cold sweat. For those few seconds, he felt as though he had been facing a viper, as though he had attracted the attention of a death god. After he recovered from his fear, a surge of anger filled him. What the hell, man? Are you trying to scare me to death? All 3 of the captains were bastards. Slyfox was insidiously vicious, Mad Dog was brutal and violent, while Mantis was completely unfathomable. However, Mantis' next words caused Cloudhawk's rage to completely vanish. Cloudhawk stood there, a stupefied look on his face. Mantis' voice was calm and cool, as though he was discussing nothing more than the most minor of matters, but his words were like a bolt of thunder. Her world is not meant for you. We were born into the darkness of the wastes, and to the darkness and the wastes we shall forever belong. What are you talking about? Mantis split open the corpse before him with precision using his scalpel, then said in his customarily emotionless voice, "Just remember what I said. You can leave now." The stunned Cloud Hawk stood there for 5 full seconds. Mantis didn't turn to look at Cloud Hawk, nor did he say anything further. He seemed completely absorbed in his research. By now, Cloud Hawk was fairly familiar with Mantis' temperament. The man valued his words like gold, but he never spoke nonsense. Did this mysterious, secretive man know something? Cloud Hawk wanted to ask, but in the end he swallowed his words. If Mantis didn't want to talk, there was no way Cloud Hawk could pry any words out of him. Besides, this really didn't matter right now. The most important thing for the moment was to go find the Queen. He had no time to waste here, and so he immediately hugged the jars of medicine to him as he fled from Mantis' workshop. There was a large apartment compound at the very center of Black Flag Outpost. Not only was this structure large, it was also extremely sturdy. In the wastelands, it could absolutely be considered a luxurious mansion. Cloud Hawk wanted to learn more about the world outside the wastelands, as well as the skills and techniques from that world. He grew more and more excited just thinking about it. He rubbed the stone hanging around his neck. Perhaps if he became a demon hunter, he would learn how to unleash the true power of this stone. This was why he insisted on learning demon hunter techniques from the blood-soaked Queen. Although he didn't know where the stone came from, he felt certain that it was extraordinary. But just as Cloud Hawk was about to enter the blood-soaked Queen's private residence, swish! A feathered arrow suddenly flew past Cloud Hawk's nose and plunged into the boulder right next to him. A quarter of the arrow had been buried into the stone, and the feather was quivering. If it had been just a few centimeters to the right, it would have blown a hole straight through Cloud Hawk's head. This place is off limits for you. Fuck off. An enormous man walked over, a number of elite guards by his side. Cloud Hawk had seen this man before and recognized him. He was the, now only, captain of the elite guards, Grizzly. He was an elite expert who was on par with the 3 captains of the Tartarus mercenaries. Cloud Hawk wouldn't be able to beat any of the elite guards, much less Grizzly himself. Why are you stopping me? Cloud Hawk stared straight at Grizzly, neither obsequious nor overbearing in his manner. The blood-soaked Queen has summoned me. Ha! Go piss in a pool and take a good look at yourself. Do you really think the Queen would summon a brat like you? The elite guards began to mock and jeer at him. So a rookie of the Tartarus mercenaries has come to my turf to cause trouble, eh? Grizzly walked towards Cloud Hawk, and it was like a mountain moving towards him. He stared at the brat before him, his bestial, hungry eyes glowing with anger. Not even Sly Fox would dare to cause trouble here. You need to fuck off before I start to get seriously pissed. Cloud Hawk wasn't frightened by Grizzly's intimidating words at all. He glared right back at the mountain-sized man. You little shit. Grizzly was infuriated by this. Just as he was about to strike, a hoarse voice suddenly rang out from inside the residence. Let him in. The voice sounded like the hissing of 100 serpents, and it was absolutely hair-raising. Grizzly came to a halt, a dazed look on his face. My queen, the blood-soaked Queen's hoarse voice rang out a second time. Do you have any objections? None at all. Grizzly hurriedly stepped backwards in a respectful manner. He was a legendary warrior of Black Flag Outpost, the first captain of the elite guards, yet he didn't even dare to breathe too loudly in the Queen's presence. Cloud Hawk truly had to admire the Queen for this. There was no way someone like Grizzly could be easily tamed. Take Sly Fox or Mad Dog as examples. Although they feared the blood-soaked Queen's power, there was no way they would truly be willing to wholeheartedly submit to her. Grizzly watched as Cloudhawk sauntered straight into the queen's private residence, a flicker of jealousy deep within his eyes. He had followed the queen for nearly a year, but had never had a chance to enter her private residence. How had this piece of refuse which the Tartarus mercenaries had picked up from who knows where managed to worm his way into the queen's good graces? How? How? Several of the elite guards began to let out unhappy mutters. The queen went missing for a few days. What's going on with her? Not even our boss Grizzly has been permitted to enter her private residence. Why the hell was the kid allowed inside? Grizzly barked, "Shut it." The guards exchanged a few glances, all of them falling silent. Why was the blood-soaked queen's rule over Black Flag Outpost such a stable one? Her overwhelming power was one reason, but another very important reason was that she had the unswerving support of the elite guards. Grizzly was the leader of the elite guards. Why was it that he was so loyal to the queen? This might be a mystery to others, but everyone in the elite guards knew the true reason. Alas, the blood-soaked queen was cruel and proud. She viewed all wastelanders as ants for the crushing or wheat for the scything. She never viewed them as equals. All of the brothers of the elite guards felt bad for Grizzly, they felt it wasn't worth it. A complex look was in Grizzly's eyes. When the blood-soaked queen had first come to Black Flag Outpost, Grizzly had, completely by accident and happenstance, managed to see her true face. It could be said that he was the very first person in the entire outpost to see her true visage. Although he had only caught a glimpse, her beauty was something out of this world and nothing which the wastelands could produce, and it was burned into his mind like a searing hot iron. Grizzly had no idea where the blood-soaked queen came from. He didn't know what she had experienced or what her goal was. He knew nothing about her at all, and none of that mattered. Ever since he had seen her true face, Grizzly had felt as though he had found a pure, sacred oasis within the dark brutality of the world. This wasn't just the love and adoration which the weak felt towards the strong, it was a type of faith, a type of conviction which every single person had. Grizzly believed that he had discovered the most beautiful thing in the world. She was the most flawless of jewels, the flame of faith which lit the darkness around him. From that day forth, he decided to completely dedicate everything he had to protecting her. He might be a crude, despicable man who wasn't worthy of holding this divine treasure in his hands, but he absolutely would not allow anything or anyone else to violate it. Not even the slightest stain was acceptable. That kid, Grizzly's large, iron-hard fists couldn't help but clench. He felt nauseous, as though he had just been forced to swallow a few dozen maggots. That dirty, low-down scavenger, how the hell had he found himself in the queen's favor? Why the hell was he being allowed into the queen's residence? Grizzly, what say I grab a few of our brothers and, one of the elite guards scanned the area, then carefully made a chopping gesture with his hand. Grizzly hesitated a moment. Be careful of the Tartarus mercenary. Slyfox is extremely protective of his people. The elite guard chuckled. Don't worry, boss. We'll kill him nice and clean. No one will suspect us at all. Grizzly couldn't help but think of Wolf. If Wolf hadn't died, the elite squad wouldn't need to fear the Tartarus mercenaries at all. He had already lost his most loyal friend, there was no way he could allow the most sacred being in his world to be befouled and besmirched by a rat. She was the final thing keeping him alive in the dark world of the wastelands. That poor bastard, Cloudhawk, would have never imagined in his wildest dreams that Grizzly was so completely infatuated with the blood-soaked queen, and he definitely would have never imagined that he had completely and thoroughly offended the entire elite guard squad of Black Flag Outpost because of this visit. I didn't expect to see you so soon. The blood-soaked queen's raven-black hair spilled across her shoulders as she walked towards him. She wasn't dressed in her usual cape or leather armor, just a long robe. Her snowy white neck was long and graceful, making her look like a proud, noble swan. The slight hint of cleavage she was showing was enough to drive almost any man mad with lust, and her long, slender pale legs were just barely visible. Her legs were like the most perfect work of art, and they added to her cold, regal dignity and beauty. The only unpleasant thing about her was that hideous demon's mask. Cloud Hawk was still too young and ignorant to be dazzled by her beauty, and his attention was drawn to something else. The bathroom had an entire tub of clean water that seemed to have been used, as it was slowly disappearing into the pipes. "Were you taking a bath, just now?" Cloud Hawk's eyes were so round they threatened to pop out of his head. "You used an entire tub's worth of clean water, just to take a bath." Book 1, Chapter 36 Accounts settled. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Water was the most precious commodity in the wastelands. 6 years ago, this outpost was nothing more than a lifeless sea of sand. A group of excavators came to this place to dig through the ruins, only to find a large amount of underground water. Ever since then, Black Flag Outpost quickly began to grow in population before ultimately reaching its current size. Water had created Black Flag Outpost. In the wastelands, those who controlled the water controlled the land. The amount of water the Queen used to bathe in daily was enough to keep Cloud Hawk alive for nearly a month. Such wasteful extravagance. But what really caused Cloud Hawk's heart to clench was the fact that this clean, pure water was used just for bathing, because after the Queen finished her bath, she let it all go down the drain. To Cloud Hawk, it wasn't water going down the pipes, it was blood, it was life itself. Cloud Hawk suddenly said something with the utmost of sincerity. "Your Majesty, would you be willing to give me all of your used bathwater?" These words were meant sincerely and without any intention to offend at all. However, in the ears of the blood-soaked Queen these words were insulting or perhaps mocking. Her gaze turned ice-cold. "Say that one more time." Cloud Hawk had no idea how he had just enraged this fierce woman yet again, but he hurriedly changed the topic. He pulled out 2 jars of liquid from his pockets. "I brought you your medicine. There should be more than enough to treat your wounds here." The blood-soaked Queen's gaze softened. She accepted them without a word of thanks, then turned and said coldly, "Follow me." The Queen's residence was simply enormous. It had a kitchen, a dining room, a bedroom, a bath, a washroom, and more. One floor was just a single giant room that was completely empty, with no objects within it save a prayer mat. This was where the Queen spent much of her time training, meditating, and praying every day. "Watch carefully." The blood-soaked Queen walked to the center of the giant training room, then slowly closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, then her entire body went into motion as she began to perform a set of extremely strange movements. The entire set of movements contained a total of 30.6 different stances that were linked together as fluidly as water. The movements seemed very simple, but in reality contained many profound mysteries to them. The Queen moved extremely slowly. It took her a total of 20 minutes before she finally finished displaying the entire set of movements. "Is that it?" Cloud Hawk had been watching intently this entire time. Although he had a very strange feeling when watching, he couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of it. "Don't tell me that's the only thing you are gonna teach me. Are you messing with me?" The blood-soaked Queen let out a cold snort. "Try them out for yourself before you say anything." Cloud Hawk muttered disdainfully, "What's so hard about them?" Guided by the blood-soaked Queen, he began to train in those movements as well. The strange thing was, as he performed the 4th movement he began to feel extremely tired. By the time he finished the 5th movement, his forehead was already covered in sweat. Every single inch of his body was aching by the 6th movement, as though his arms and legs were weighed down with 1,000-pound weights. Finally, by the 7th movement, Cloud Hawk could no longer hold back. "Ow, ow, OW. That freaking hurts." Cloud Hawk felt as though every single muscle in his body was being ripped apart, with all the energy having been drained out of his cells. He felt such agonizing pain that he just plopped down onto the ground, moaning as he writhed in pain. The feeling was simply indescribable. Those movements looked very ordinary, and the blood-soaked queen had managed to complete all of them without even working up a sweat. Cloud Hawk, however, was in such pain by the seventh exhausting movement that he could no longer take it. Cloud Hawk moaned and groaned for quite a few minutes before slowly starting to recover. He felt certain that he had been tricked, and he glared at the queen accusingly. "Don't tell me you demon hunters spend all your time practicing those movements. Are you all masochists?" The blood-soaked queen said placidly, "This is a basic training exercise meant to temper the body. Only by training in it for extended periods of time can you unlock the potential within your body. It will stimulate every aspect of your body, accelerating your growth in every way as it helps you become more powerful through giving you metapower enhancements. This is nothing more than a basic training exercise for demon hunters. Just a basic training exercise." The blood-soaked queen seemed to know exactly what Cloud Hawk was thinking. Although this is a basic technique, if you can fully complete all 30.6 movements and then gain some practical combat experience, you won't be weaker than any other person in this entire outpost. Was this technique really that incredible? In the wastelands, meta powers were generally only activated over the course of multiple life-and-death situations. Cloud Hawk had never thought that it would be possible to use a systemized training regime to increase his own strength and meta powers. It seemed as though demon hunters truly did have a few tricks up their sleeves. No wonder they were so strong. Right now, Cloud Hawk would rather die than try out the complete set of exercises a second time. Still, he was able to separate those 30.6 movements and train in them separately, which was less taxing. He went through all 30.6 movements, slowly but firmly engraving all of them deep into his mind. By now, he had fully memorized all of them. At the very least, he would have gained access to a technique which would help him grow stronger. Wait a second. Cloud Hawk was no fool. He wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. After having spent a considerable period of time silently memorizing the techniques, he suddenly seemed to wake up. He turned to the queen and said in a loud, righteous voice, "I might be a kid, but I'm not an idiot. Don't even think you can fool me that easily. You know full well that this isn't what I want to learn. I want to learn real techniques that will let me have the same special powers as you. This set of training exercises could only be used to train, temper, and strengthen the body." What Cloud Hawk really wanted to learn was how to use the same unfathomable, supernatural powers as the demon hunters had access to. Did the blood-soaked queen really think she'd be able to fob him off with a set of basic training movements? Screw that. Humph. You really don't know what's good for you. The blood-soaked queen said coldly, "You haven't been blessed by the gods, and your mind has not been awoken to its psychic potential. Most importantly of all, you don't even have a divine relic. Do you really think that learning our techniques will give you access to our power? How laughable. I insist on learning them." Cloud Hawk shook his head stubbornly. And what the heck are divine relics? What were divine relics? In truth, these divine relics were magical artifacts which the gods had bestowed upon mankind. The principal qualification needed to become a demon hunter was the ability to control and wield divine relics. There were many different relics with many different attributes. Some held sway over fire, wind, ice, earth, and other elemental powers. The vast majority of demon hunters could only become psychically resonant with one type of relic, and the relics were at the core of the true power which they were able to wield. The blood-soaked queen's gloves and the cross hanging around her neck were both heaven-sent relics which the gods had bestowed upon their demon hunters. It was thanks to these mighty artifacts that the blood-soaked queen possessed such inconceivable, supernatural power. But of course, having access to relics alone did not a demon hunter make. Demon hunters not only needed powerful relics, they also needed powerful reservoirs of psychic energy. Psychic energy, in and of itself, possessed no offensive power. However, once it was perfectly joined together with an attuned type of divine relic, it could create supernatural effects of unbelievable power. The more psychic energy a demon hunter possessed, the more power the demon hunter would be able to unleash from his or her relics. The blood-soaked queen's sacred crossblade of light was a divine relic. It normally hung around her neck in the form of an ordinary dot-looking cross, but when she filled it with her attuned psychic energy, its true form as a sacred crossblade would be awakened, resulting in it transforming into a sword of light that could cut through all things. If the sacred crossblade of light fell into Wastelander hands or into the hands of a demon hunter who had a different type of psychic energy, it would be of no use at all despite its tremendous power. Demon hunters were partially honored for their power, and partially because they were so incredibly few in number. Even in the blessed lands loved by the gods, very few people had the talent needed to become a demon hunter. As for the wastelands and its foul heathens who had been forsaken by the gods, they were born with tainted, corrupt blood in their veins. How could a place like this possibly give birth to someone with the talent needed to become a demon hunter? Thunk. The blood-soaked queen tossed a pitch-black staff to the ground. This staff was made of an unknown material. It looked very slick, but didn't reflect any light at all. It was roughly 3 feet long, and it was topped with a tri-edged screw blade that was incredibly sharp. This was a weapon that could be used to stab or to hack, and in both situations it would create huge, gaping wounds. The hilt of this tri-bladed staff was round, metallic, and covered in squiggly lines that helped ensure the wielder was able to maintain a solid grip around it. At the very base of the staff was a mysterious rune that looked like the runes on the queen's gloves and cross. A faint ripple of power emanated from the staff. Although the aura was very weak, there was no mistaking it at all. Completely surprised, Cloudhawk picked the staff up. So this is a relic as well. Is this kid really able to hear a so-called song from divine relics? A puzzled look appeared on the blood-soaked queen's face. Still, she didn't spend too much time on this question as she began to give a fairly simple explanation. Rookie demon hunters are unable to take control over powerful relics, and so the temple has created a number of low-grade weapons and armaments for them to use. This weapon is known as an exorcist staff. Although it isn't really a relic, it has the same properties as relics. Are you giving this to me? Cloudhawk felt shocked by this sudden display of favor. He lifted up the metal staff and gave it a few experimental twirls, then used his knuckles to wrap it. Even if it was nothing more than an ordinary weapon, it was still quite a sturdy and powerful one. There was no way it would be as easily hacked through as an ordinary iron sword. It's been a long time since low-grade relics like this were of any use to me. No trace of emotion could be heard from the blood-soaked queen's hoarse voice. Consider it my gift to you. Now, our accounts are settled. From this day forth, neither of us owe each other anything. You can leave now. Never come here again. Damn, she's pretty heartless. Was it really necessary for her to draw such a clear line between the two of them? Wastelanders were human beings, same as her. Why were their lives supposedly worthless? Cloudhawk heaved a sigh. After having lived with each other for several days, he had thought that the queen was beginning to view him a bit differently. Apparently, she felt just as disdainful towards him as she had from the start. Cloudhawk silently put away the exorcist staff, then said a single word solemnly. Thanks, don't thank me. The queen turned and left the room, her hoarse and raspy voice ringing out behind her. Sooner or later, Black Flag Outpost is going to be embroiled into a huge battle. If you want to stay alive, you need to leave this place immediately. This is my final warning to you. From this day forth, it'll be as though we've never met. You're on your own. Cloudhawk slowly left the queen's private residence. He stood in front of the entrance for a few moments, a blank look on his face and a rather uncomfortable feeling in his heart. The blood-soaked queen was very young, but possessed incredible power. Even in the Elysian lands, she had to be an incredible figure, right? Cloudhawk was nothing more than a scavenger who had struggled for most of his life to stay alive in the ruins. The gulf between the two was as vast as the Empyrean moat which separated the heavens from the earth. There was no way to bridge that gap. For them to have met each other was nothing more than a complete accident, a twist of fate. Now, the lines of their destiny were about to untangle as they continued on their separate paths. In the end, it was guaranteed that they would never meet again. Cloudhawk shook his head vigorously. What the hell was he even thinking about? This was nothing more than a brief, chance meeting. Cloudhawk had helped the Queen survive the most dangerous period of her life, and the Queen had repaid him by giving him what he desired most. Now, their accounts were settled. Neither owed the other. This was an excellent ending, right? The light of the moon bathed the quiet outpost in its glow. In truth, the outpost was almost terrifyingly silent tonight. Exorcist staff in hand, Cloudhawk began the trip back to the mercenary outpost. Halfway there, his heart rate suddenly began to speed up as a feeling of incredible unease began to fill his entire body, making him feel as though he had suddenly been dunked into a pool of cold water. He had a premonition of intense danger. Who is it? Cloudhawk barked towards the dark alleyway up ahead of him. Stop hiding. Come out. These words seemed to part the darkness as a black silhouette suddenly charged out, hurtling a knife straight towards Cloudhawk. This strike had been aimed with perfect timing and from the perfect angle. The knife seemed to be filled with all the power and skill the knife thrower could muster, with no wasted motion and no flowery flourishes. Without question, this came from a seasoned warrior, a veteran of 100 battles. An expert combatant was after his life. Cloudhawk instinctively lashed out with his exorcist staff, knocking the knife aside. As the tri-blade staff clanged against the knife was split in half while just the slightest of scratches appeared on the tri-blade. Although Cloudhawk had an absolute advantage in terms of weaponry, the difference in strength between the two was noticeable. His wrist blazed with pain, and the staff nearly flew out of his grasp. Cloudhawk hurriedly scampered backwards a few steps. Before he even had a chance to catch his footing, the black-garbed man came charging towards him with a second strike. The second knife cut out in a powerful yet beautiful arc, filled with highly focused power. The trajectory of the strike ensured that there was nowhere for Cloudhawk to dodge at all. Fortunately, Cloudhawk's reaction time was fast enough that he was able to block this second attack as well. Clang! Sparks erupted in midair, briefly lighting up the darkness of the night. Cloudhawk was finally knocked off balance and sent tumbling to the ground from the power of this blow. He was sent rolling backwards on the ground in a clumsy fashion. The black-garbed man seemed hell-bent on his death, sending out yet another knife strike slicing through the dark night towards Cloudhawk with meteoric speed. Book 1, Chapter 37 Exorcist Staff. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Cloudhawk had spent more than a full month training every day with the mercenaries. Although he wasn't exactly strong, he wasn't a weakling either. Despite that, just 2 knife strikes had knocked him completely off his game. That meant this bastard had to be roughly on par with some of the top ranked members of the Tartarus mercenaries. The knife gleamed as it came howling towards him like a meteor. There was nowhere to run and no way to block. It seemed as though all hope was lost. Cloudhawk could feel the threat of death breathing down his neck, and his heart was filled with a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. The rage in his chest and the madness deep inside his bones once more broke free from their shackles, as they had so long ago when he had killed that mutated hound. The adrenaline rush swept through every single part of his body, infiltrating every single cell and infusing him with strength. He slapped the ground with his left hand, righting himself and somersaulting to his feet. He then swung his right arm, lashing out with the staff. The tri-bladed staff swept out like a tornado, smashing directly into the knife and once more kicking up a storm of sparks. The black-garbed man was shocked. The kid had to be moving nearly twice as fast as he was before. And that wasn't the greatest transformation. The greatest transformation was in Cloudhawk's demeanor. Moments ago, Cloudhawk was like a gentle sheep that was about to be slaughtered. Now, he seemed to have transformed into a savage and infuriated wolf. Cloudhawk let out a furious roar, then actually charged towards his enemy. He delivered 5 high-speed stabbing blows with his staff. There was no technique, no artifice, no subterfuge to these strikes, this was pure speed and viciousness. Every single strike seemed to howl through the air as Cloudhawk unleashed his latent, berserk side. It was as though he was going to kill this enemy no matter what, even if it cost him his own life. Clang! 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 The sound of metal on metal rang out as sparks continued to fly everywhere. The two exchanged multiple blows within a short period of time, and this time, it was Cloudhawk who was dominating the fight. The black-garbed man was forced onto the defensive, and he frantically blocked as he tried to deal with the shock he was feeling. What the hell? The kid's as mad as friggin' mad dog. He's gone totally berserk. However, this wasn't exactly the case. Whenever Mad Dog tasted blood, he would go into a completely berserk state where he had no control over himself at all. In contrast, Cloudhawk was able to maintain a modicum of clarity despite his berserk state. For example, he noticed that despite having launched a furious barrage of attacks, his opponent was still able to defend as steady as a rock. Cloudhawk knew that this wasn't a fight to prolong, and so he suppressed the berserk emotions coursing through him and immediately turned to flee. Cloudhawk had always relied on two things to keep himself alive: his preternaturally sharp bestial instincts, and power born from rage. The first was something he had been born with, while the latter was an ability that had been enhanced by the stone around his neck. However, it was evident that neither of these two things were going to be enough for him to deal with this foe in front of him. I need to get the hell out of here, as fast as I can. If I can make it back to the mercenary base, there'll be nothing he can do to me. This was what Cloudhawk was counting on, but just moments after he started to flee, two more figures suddenly appeared out of nowhere and barred his path, their swords shooting towards him like a pair of thunderbolts descending from the night skies. He had seen no trace of them earlier, and he didn't see where they came from. They were like gusts of wind that had just blown in from a world beyond. The timing and aim of these two swords were both immaculately perfect. They struck like a pincer, giving him nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Cloudhawk frantically struck out with his tri-bladed staff, but was only able to block one of the two swords. Just as the staff clanked against the first sword, the second sword came piercing towards his throat. Cloudhawk frantically tried to dodge, but the sword still sliced a bloody wound in his shoulder as it flew past him. Cloudhawk delivered a furious backhanded blow with his staff, but his opponent leapt away quite agilely. The two swordsmen were flanking Cloudhawk from the front while the saber-wielder was chasing after him from behind. His path forwards was blocked, while the path backwards was also sealed. Cloudhawk was now like an animal trapped in a cage. His bloodshot gaze swept across the three, and he then let out a bestial growl. I don't know any of you. Why do you want to kill me? There was no response. Cloudhawk was now surrounded by all three assassins. They immediately moved to attack, not hesitating or pausing in the slightest or wasting a single breath on conversation. They moved in perfect harmony with precision and speed. They were true warriors, true elites, true assassins. In terms of speed, timing, strength, and everything else, they worked together with perfect cohesion. By now, Cloudhawk could tell that there was nowhere for him to flee. He was surrounded by what felt like a web of cold, metallic light. No matter where he moved or where he dodged, he would still be trapped within the web of attacks. The web of metallic death quickly began to shrink around him. In just another moment, his body would be torn asunder. Damn, damn, damn. Cloudhawk was boiling with rage and resentment. Why the hell were these people attacking him? None of this made no sense. Was he about to die without even knowing who was behind it or why? No matter what, he refused to accept that this would be how his destiny ended. Fuck off. If he couldn't tell where the attacks were coming from, he wouldn't even look at them. His mind was completely blank as he swept out with his staff, but as he did so, he could suddenly sense a strange sort of dormant energy in his body flow out into the staff. The runes on the exorcist's staff instantly lit up. The tri-dot blades on the top of the staff suddenly began to spin so quickly that they seemed to transform into a cylindrical shape. This high-speed, high-friction movement caused sparks to appear that could be seen with the naked eye. As the exorcist's staff swept outwards, it suddenly let out an indescribable shriek as it tore through the air. This wasn't a staff-strike. This was the summoning of a windstorm. The three warriors had never seen anything like this before. Despite their talent and experience, they were all stunned, and in that brief instant, the exorcist's staff slammed towards them, shattering the two swords and the saber as if they were made out of fragile glass and reducing them into tiny fragments. Even Cloudhawk was amazed to discover how powerful this strike from his exorcist's staff was. It was actually beyond his ability to control. Right now, it wasn't Cloudhawk swinging the staff, it was the staff flying out with Cloudhawk attached to it. After completing the circular swing, the staff smashed directly into the ground. Boom! The psychic energy burst out from the exorcist's staff, striking out like a thunderbolt. The psychic storm kicked up by this explosion caused the metal fragments of the destroyed weapons to fly into the air, while the three attackers were blasted several meters backwards. Terrified, they scuttled backwards hurriedly before finally clambering to their feet. "Let's get the hell out of here." The three warriors were absolutely terrified, and they immediately moved to flee. They couldn't be blamed for their fear. Cloudhawk himself was about to piss his pants. What the hell had just happened? How was it that the power of the exorcist's staff had suddenly been unleashed? The blood-soaked queen had told him that demon hunters needed to be able to wield psychic energy, which required natural talent, painstaking training, and the blessings of the gods. Cloudhawk was a wastelander who had lived in the wastelands his entire life. Even if he did have the natural talent, he had never had a chance to train in it. The blessings of the gods. He didn't even know what the gods were. Could it be? Cloudhawk suddenly thought back to the brief coma he had been in after that fight in the inn-house. He had experienced a strange dream where he had met a strange man who spoke of giving Cloudhawk some power. When Cloudhawk had woken up he didn't really notice anything strange, and so he had believed it to be not more than a dream. Could the dream have been real? Cloudhawk lifted up the exorcist's staff, then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He could clearly sense the ripples emanating from inside the staff. Suddenly, it felt as though a guitar string had just been plucked within his mind, causing an indescribably marvelous sound to cry out. The tri-dot blades on the staff once more began to rotate at high speeds. Cloudhawk struck at a nearby rock with the staff. A tremendous surge of resonant power instantly swept out from the staff, and the rock was instantly shattered into countless pieces. Badass. This is freaking badass. Even Mad Dog would find it hard to resist such a heavy strike. Although Cloudhawk was fairly weak in many aspects, if he could use relics he would have a chance to be catapulted to the general level of the blood-soaked queen. Cloudhawk was incredibly excited. How could he not be? He had been indescribably weak, but he now realized that he was capable of tremendous power. Naturally, his first instinct was to test it out even further. But just as he was about to strike a third time, he felt his vision grow dark. Pain flooded his mind, causing him to nearly lose his balance. It seemed as though these attacks would exhaust his psionic energy. There was no way to use those abilities non-stop. Can't stay here. Those three were so confident in being able to kill me, they didn't bring any bows or guns. If they come back fully armed, I'm going to be completely screwed. Even though Cloudhawk now possessed tremendous destructive power, he was still very weak in many aspects. Sure, he might be able to beat back Mad Dog in a head-on clash, but if the two were in a real battle Mad Dog would never give him a chance to do that. Hell, Mad Dog would probably chop me into mincemeat before I even had a chance to strike. The wastelands remained a dangerous place. He couldn't be too brash. This bit of power he had just gained was far from being enough. Still, Cloudhawk remembered how the blood-soaked queen had said that exorcist staffs were merely the lowest level relics that were mass-produced. Only newly trained rookie demon hunters would use these relics, which meant that this tri-bladed staff really wasn't all that powerful, at least by the standards of the Elysian lands. In other words, if he could find more powerful relics, he'd be able to unleash even more powerful attacks. Cloudhawk smiled at the thought, then put away the staff and quickly disappeared into the darkness of the night. The night was only growing darker. The cold light of the moon shone down from the skies, casting its pristine light upon the endless desolation of the wastelands. Cloudhawk was squatting within his own room, his hands clasped together and his face red with excitement. Even the veins on his body were popping out. He looked like he was suffering from some sort of strange, incurable disease, or as though he was trying to do something incredibly difficult with nothing to show for it. Cloudhawk let out a frustrated cry, then fell to the ground like a deflated balloon. He panted loudly, a look of frustration and defeat on his face. A stone lay quietly within his hands, not having changed one bit this entire time. Why wasn't the blasted thing doing anything? Cloudhawk was clearly capable of using divine relics, but no matter how hard he tried or how hard he focused on the stone, he was unable to have any effect on it at all. The stone was still nothing more than a stone, it didn't seem to have any special effects at all. Cloudhawk felt incredibly disappointed. Still, he felt certain that this stone contained some sort of inconceivable power within it. To this very day, he could clearly remember what had happened to him when he had found this stone within that dark underground passageway. He had been teleported straight into a completely foreign land. The memories of that experience had been engraved into his very bones. In that instant, Cloudhawk felt as though he had gained a brief glimpse into the true nature of all things. It seemed as though all things were in reality nothing more than a collection of strings. When these strings thrummed at different frequencies, they resulted in different types of matter being formed, resulting in the world around them. Actually, come to think of it, the divine relics really didn't seem to be that strange or mysterious. Cloudhawk could sense that these relics were capable of changing the frequency at which those strings vibrated, causing matter to change and transform on a fundamental level. This was why they were able to unleash inconceivable amounts of power out of seemingly nowhere. This was also the reason why Cloudhawk continued to hear a song from them. Cloudhawk had grown up alongside the old timer. Ever since he was young, he had heard the old timer speak of the things which had existed during the old times. In Cloudhawk's eyes, those things were full of mysteries and marvels. Perhaps divine relics were just products of an even higher level technology. If he had mentioned this to the blood-soaked queen, she would almost certainly have executed him for his blasphemous claim. To a pious devotee like her, divine relics were the products of the miracles which the almighty gods had bestowed upon their faithful. How could they be compared to artificial items created by mortal hands? Cloudhawk himself didn't really believe in or care about these so-called gods. If they truly were all powerful and benevolent, why wouldn't they save all of mankind? Why wouldn't they save the wastelands? Book 1, Chapter 38 Mission. You're listening at novelfull.audio. Cloudhawk was brooding over the recent ambush. Those ambushers had been amongst the most skilled warriors the outpost had to offer, and enemies in the shadows were always harder to deal with than enemies you could see. If he was constantly harassed and stalked by these powerful assassins, he'd never be able to rest easily. And so, the very next morning he immediately reported this matter to the other mercenaries. Mad Dog was slightly intrigued. Who the fuck would want to ambush you? Cloudhawk had no idea either. All I know is that those three were really skilled. There has to be something strange going on. Oh ho, is that so? Mad Dog scratched his ears, then said in an intentionally puzzled voice, all three of them were really powerful experts, but they still couldn't kill you, eh? Poor bastards. I wonder how the hell those fuckers even managed to stay alive for so long. All the mercenaries roared with laughter when they heard this. Cloudhawk hurriedly revealed the slashed wound on his shoulder. I'm not kidding, you guys. Look, I got stabbed here. I almost died. Even if the kid really had been attacked by someone, the mercenaries refused to believe that those people were experts. If 3 of them couldn't even kill a single rookie like Cloudhawk, how skilled could they possibly be? Alright already. It was just an ambush. No big deal. Shit, who hasn't been ambushed? And why the hell were you running around outside anyhow? I told you not to. It's your own damn fault. Mad Dog waved his hand impatiently, interrupting Cloudhawk. He then said in a loud voice, listen up, everyone. All of you need to stay here and not go running around. Something big is about to go down. Right at this moment, the sound of Woola's barks could suddenly be heard as Sly Fox pulled Woola into the courtyard with a large steel chain around his neck. Gather around, everyone. Woola walked towards Cloudhawk, letting out a few wild barks as a savage, threatening look appeared on his face. Most likely, he was quite irritated by Cloudhawk not having gone over to clean his kennel out over the past few days. After having lived here for so long, Cloudhawk no longer feared this strange freak as much as he had when he had first arrived, and so he pretended not to see anything. I've got good news, everyone. The fat man's voice boomed out, his face ruddy with excitement. The big guy just sent us a new mission, and the rewards will be enough to keep us fed for 3 years. Make your preparations, because we're heading out immediately. The big guy. Was this the figure Cloudhawk had seen last time, the black-clothed man who wore that strange breathing mask? Cloudhawk had a very uncomfortable feeling about this. That fellow had offered a bountiful reward for the stone Cloudhawk had found. Was it possible that he knew some of the stone's secrets? If he managed to discover that Cloudhawk was the one holding the stone, Cloudhawk would probably end up dead. Sly Fox began to issue orders to the various mercenaries. Mantis and 2 of the mercs would stay behind to stand guard over their home while all the rest would take part in this mission, including their newest rookie, Cloudhawk. In other words, a total of 20.7 figures would mobilize for this assignment. This was essentially all the power they had to spare. Sly Fox was both a cautious yet cunning fellow. For him to go out on such a limb and devote so many resources to this mission was most likely due to the fact that the offer really was too good to refuse, but that also meant that the danger they would face was similarly enormous. The mercenaries quickly began to make their preparations. As for Sly Fox, he beamed merrily as he walked straight towards Cloudhawk. You are pretty lucky, kid, your first mission will be an incredibly profitable one. I'll tell you straight up, once we finish this mission, we'll have all the wine and meat we want to eat, and all the big-breasted, big-butted women we want to enjoy. You'll be thanking me for days on end. Like hell. Cloudhawk had learned from his previous mistakes. He'd rather be locked up with a starving wolf for 48 hours than to believe a word this fat man said. Hell, he'd rather believe the wolf wouldn't eat him. The more the fatty swore he was telling the truth, the more nervous Cloudhawk felt. Can I stay back here with Mantis and guard our home instead? No way. Sly Fox knew exactly what Cloudhawk was worried about. An extremely unhappy look appeared on his chubby face. Kid, this ain't gonna be like last time, alright. Ask anyone, I never fuck over my own people. You don't got shit to worry about, understand? Fucking hell, you're young and useless. Listen up, you don't have any say in the matter. You are going. Sly Fox forced a ragged cloth into Cloudhawk's hands. Read this intelligence report carefully and stop wasting time. 40 minutes from now, we're heading out. If anyone wastes so much as a single minute, I'm breaking their fucking legs. Cloudhawk stared at the tattered piece of cloth in his hands, reading the contents within it twice. Mission. To hunt down and kill a mutated rat king. Mission description. The employer has located a lair of mutated rats located not too far from the western sides of Black Flag Outpost. These mutated dire rats are roughly the size of wolf dogs but are incredibly fast and possess powerful offensive attacks. We conservatively estimate that the entire lair has between 1 to 200 rats, but our estimates may be in error. These particular dire rats have undergone all sorts of strange mutations, and they possess certain powers which other dire rats do not have. The dire rat king in particular is an extremely valuable and unique specimen. Your mission is to find the dire rat king. Conditions permitting, capture it alive. Your payment shall be increased by an additional 50% if you can do so. If you cannot capture it alive, do your best to preserve the body as much as possible and keep it undamaged. Rats were always tenacious creatures. No matter what types of natural disasters occurred, they would still be able to quickly adapt, survive, and flourish. As a result, there were now many different types of rats in the world. However, based on the mutated rats which Cloud Hawk had seen in the past, they weren't exactly very powerful. As for the mission report, it similarly didn't seem to suggest that this would be a particularly difficult mission. And yet, Cloud Hawk knew that there was no way things could be as simple as this. Their employer hadn't described the various abilities these mutated rats possessed, but the promised rewards testified as to how deadly this mission would be. And in truth, Cloud Hawk was completely stunned by the value of this contract. Hard currency was rarely used in the wastelands, with barter in gunpowder, firearms, weapons, medicines, and food being the most common forms of trade. Aside from these common items, there was something else that was quite expensive and beloved by many. Certain special materials could be extracted from mutated animals and plants, then mixed together according to an extremely complicated alchemical formula to form a type of medicine that was known as an enhancement mutagen. Enhancement mutagens had an extremely simple effect. They stimulated and accelerated the body into developing metapowers or strengthening existing ones, allowing the user to become even more powerful, and that was exactly what would be awarded to them if they completed this mission. Enhancement mutagens, as well as many other valuable items. This was a staggeringly valuable fortune. Missions like this truly were rare. Not only would it bring them enormous wealth, it could also allow the company as a whole to grow much stronger. Cloud Hawk was a newbie. If he didn't take part in this mission, he wouldn't be given any part of the spoils or receive any of the rewards. Maybe Sly Fox told the truth for once. Maybe he really is doing this out of the kindness of his heart. There would be a certain degree of danger, of course. The wastelands had been forsaken by the gods, and so manna would never descend from the heavens. The organization which had issued this mission was one of the major powers of the wastelands, and every single mission they issued had most certainly been judged carefully before the relevant rewards were assigned. The promised payout really was directly correlated to the danger of the mission. Cloudhawk's dream was to leave the wastelands, but actually delving through the wastes was no easy feat. More than anything else, he needed to grow more powerful and acquire more armor and armaments. How could he possibly ignore such a tempting, lucrative opportunity? Cloud Hawk immediately felt much more relaxed about this mission. Mad Dog began to issue equipment to the rest of the Tartarus mercenaries. Nothing in the wastelands was ever handed out for free. If you wanted equipment, you had to pay a fee for it. The equipment pool for the mercenary company was considered shared property, and so each person had to earn credit in order to take equipment out of the pool. Credit was earned in a very simple way. You donated equipment or items you didn't need to the pool, and you would earn credit for it. You would also earn credit for going out on missions alongside the rest of the company. Cloud Hawk had 2 guns but no bullets. 3 points of credit were needed for a single shotgun shell, while just 1 point of credit was needed for an ordinary 9mm bullet. Generally speaking, a single strip of rat jerky also cost a single point of credit. Cloud Hawk was brand new to Tartarus, and hadn't been out on any missions during the past month. How could he possibly afford any of this expensive equipment? Mad Dog waved his hand impatiently. Fuck it, I'll give it to you on loan. You can pay me back after this mission is done. I'll just charge you a tiny bit of interest, just 50%. 50% was just a tiny bit of interest. You are a freaking robber. The fuck you talking about, kid? Mad Dog cursed loudly. I don't even know if you'll survive this mission. This isn't robbery, this is a high-risk loan, got it? I'm taking on the risk of getting nothing back at all. If you don't want to take my offer, you can go fuck yourself. There was nothing he could do. Cloudhawk had to just hold his nose and accept the offer. A short while later, 10 pistol bullets and 4 shotgun shells fell into his pouch. Black Flag Outpost's gunpowder was all hand-crafted, and as a result the quality wasn't all that high, and the quantity was fairly low as well. Still, at least it was safe to use, usually. Right. Your leather armor is already finished. Mad Dog tossed a suit of wolf-skin leather armor to Cloudhawk. This suit of armor had been crafted from the alpha rot wolf Cloudhawk had slain, and it was fairly sturdy and had good defensive properties. The cost of producing this armor was around 20 points of credit. Need any close combat weapons? I already have what I need. A poor broke bastard like Cloudhawk would avoid using firearms whenever possible. As a result, cold weapons would always be what he primarily relied upon. The mercenaries held quite a few cold weapons in their armory, including sabers, sword, hammers, and axes. Cloudhawk already had his exorcist staff, and so he needed no other types of equipment. Where the hell did you even find that thing, kid? Mad Dog glanced sideways at the staff on Cloudhawk's back. His experienced eye revealed to him that this edged screw-bladed staff was an extremely sharp weapon that could be used to stab or to slash. If it pierced into an opponent's body, even if the opponent didn't die right away, he would still find it difficult to stem the blood loss from such a jagged wound. It truly was a fine close combat weapon. Here's a skinning knife. Take it. Mad Dog tossed Cloudhawk a short dagger, then instructed, we're about to head out. You'll be responsible for keeping Woola on his leash. For this mission, you are in charge of Woola. The Tartarus Company had always used Woola as their guard dog, but this mission was rather special. Given how alert Woola's nose was, his tracking abilities would most likely come in handy. Thus, they brought him along as well. The reason they assigned a rookie like Cloudhawk to be in charge of Woola was partially because the two of them had become fairly close over the past month. It was also because they knew that Cloudhawk had very little actual combat experience and was fairly weak. Woola was a bloodthirsty savage, but at least he was also a powerful combatant. Assigning Woola to Cloudhawk was a way for them to help the newbie out. Woola let out a few barking growls as he ran over on all 6 legs. He seemed to be quite displeased by the fact that he would be under Cloudhawk's control. Woola's strength was simply incredible. Even though Cloudhawk was now much stronger than when he had first arrived, he was still essentially being pulled forwards by Woola rather than vice versa. Cars here. Prepare to head out. The mercenaries were all fully outfitted with armor, masks, cloaks, and other strange weapons and types of equipment. This squad truly did represent the uniqueness of the Wastelands and its character. Book 1, Chapter 39. Heading out. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Wastelands were vast beyond end. It was nearly impossible to travel through them on foot, making reliable forms of transportation incredibly important. The quality of the transportation network in the Wastelands was uniformly poor. Although large excavator outposts often had tamed beasts that could be used for transport or shoddily assembled vehicles, there was a limit to how many vehicles or beasts they could acquire. In the end, only a tiny fraction of the people ever had a chance to use them. Given how innately ferocious most mutabeasts were, there were very few which could be tamed and trained to serve as mounts. It also took an extremely long period of time to find and capture young beasts, then raise them into full adulthood. This entire process was very expensive and had a high chance of failure, making every single mutabeast's mount an incredibly valuable possession. As for the Wastelander vehicles, they were assembled from a wide variety of random parts, most of which had been dug up from below the ground. Other parts were taken from captured vehicles that had been won on the field battles. Some of the crudest parts needed could even be self-manufactured. In general, it was quite a feat to be able to get these things to even move. However, you could forget about producing a vehicle that could truly conquer the rugged terrain and inhospitable environs of the wastelands. Mutabeast mounts needed food and water, while Wastelander vehicles needed gasoline. Due to these various constraints, most Wastelanders were confined to a very small area around the outposts. Only blood-drinking madmen like the mercenaries of the Tartarus Company would dare venture farther afield and into more dangerous areas. The Tartarus mercenaries were amongst the oldest organizations of Black Flag Outpost, and they had built up a collection of transports over the years. This time, Sly Fox mobilized 5 Wastelands vehicles. 4 were off-road vehicles while the 5th was a freight truck. It had been quite some time since Black Flag Outpost had seen a caravan like this set out. The bumpers on the Tartarus vehicles had all been torn off and replaced by sharp spikes, while the car doors, roofs, and tires were all studded with spikes as well. These 4 ridiculously barbaric-looking vehicles looked like enormous steel hedgehogs as their gear-like tires tore through the ground, which was why the mercenaries often referred to them as their iron hedgehogs. As for their freight trucks, they were enormous in size. Each freight truck had 8 tires, and they had 2 enormous slabs of steel fastened to the front of the car, with each slab of steel angled at 30 degrees. Behind the truck was an ugly cage-like carriage. On the whole, it looked like some sort of skeletal creepy-crawly creature. And so, the Tartarus mercenaries had given it a friendly nickname, the Iron Lizard. The Tartarus mercenaries often used these vehicles. In order to avoid mishaps and vehicular damage, they spent quite some time adjusting them and reinforcing them as necessary. Although the vehicles remained exceptionally ugly and had no aesthetics to them at all, from a functional standpoint they were more or less decently equipped to deal with the harshness of the wastelands. In addition to the vehicles, there were 8 Bigfoot birds that were letting out strange cries as 8 fully equipped mercenaries rode atop them. Cook was going to be the leader for the mounted mercenaries on this mission. Cook was fairly strong even amongst the mercenaries, and he was more than qualified to be the captain of the mounted division. His weapon of choice was a long billhook that was 7 feet long. This weapon had the best attributes of both scythes and spears, and it could be used in a mounted charge and also be used to slash and hack. It was the perfect weapon for a cavalryman. They had a main force, auxiliary forces, scouts, rear guards, training, and tactics. This mercenary company would be considered an elite outfit anywhere in the entire wastelands, and every single member of the company was exceptionally talented and very experienced. They were extremely powerful in combat and more than able to deal with the vast majority of dangers. However, what was the most dangerous thing in the wastelands? The schemes of other men. Terrifying natural disasters, brutal beast waves, in the end, nothing held a candle compared to the dark hearts of other men. Humans are by nature communal animals who need to live amongst others of their race, and so it is necessary to always be wary of the danger which other people could pose. Countless real-life examples had proven that sometimes, humans could be even more savage than any beast and even more dreadful than any natural disaster. This was an era of chaos. It was almost impossible to find a group of brothers and friends that you could truly rely on. The mercenaries might be crude, rough, lawless, and brutal, but at least they were very unified and loyal to each other. This was something which Cloudhawk had slowly come to realize during the past month he had been with them. The reason why the Tartarus mercenaries had been able to survive for so long was most likely due to their unity, something which was incredibly rare in a place like the Wastelands. Come back soon. The other warriors of the outpost all waved farewell to the mercenaries. Even Grizzly and the members of the elite squad were there to send them off. Every so often, their gazes would flicker as they glanced at Cloudhawk, strange looks in their eyes. The gates to the outpost swung open. The mercenaries were officially heading out. Cloud Hawk, Woola, and the 8 Bigfoot bird riders were all arranged to ride aboard the Iron Lizard. Bigfoot birds were excellent mounts, but they only had so many of them. If they were forced to run 100 kilometers alongside the vehicles, they'd probably be exhausted by the time they were actually needed in battle. The 5 vehicles rumbled out in a straight line. 2 iron hedgehogs led the way while 2 brought up the rear, with the Iron Lizard being at the very middle as this squad of elite mercenaries drove deeper into the rolling yellow sands of the desert wastelands. The wastelands were so vast as to engender despair upon those who tried to traverse it, and countless ruins and skeletons were hidden beneath its sands. It had been roughly a month and a half since the last time Cloud Hawk had traversed these sands, but this time his emotions were completely different. The Tartarus mercenaries looked like a long, sinuous yellow dragon that slowly wound its way out of Black Flag Outpost's territory and made its way deeper into the seared desert wastelands. None of them noticed that right at this moment, a group of men outfitted in strange equipment were hidden furtively nearby the outpost. It seemed as though they were keeping a close watch on what was happening inside the outpost. The leader of this group was a muscular man who seemed to brim with strength and vitality. His skin was raven-black and gleamed with a slick oil that made him look almost metallic. He was completely bald, but 2 crude-looking bull horns could be seen atop his head. As for his weapon, it was an enormous greatsword that was the height of a normal human being. This weapon had to weigh at least 100 pounds. Only a man of enormous strength would be capable of wielding such a thing, and clearly, this man was one. Just as clearly, he was a mutant. But despite his crude appearance and his brutal demeanor, he had a pair of cold, viper-like eyes that were filled with deathly calm as he stared unblinkingly at that settlement in the sands, Black Flag Outpost. Right at this moment, a comparatively slimmer mutant came running towards him. This person's entire body was covered with grayish-white feathers. He had a sharp mouth and bird-like feet, and wings were growing out of his back that suggested he was perhaps capable of flight. This second person let out a soft growl. "Number 2, things are gonna work out better this time, right? This demon hunter is pretty tough." Number 4 died in her hands. "Don't worry, Number 3. I've already looked carefully into this matter. She came to the wastelands by herself, and there is no chance that any other demon hunters will appear here. Do you really think this woman is strong enough to fight against our master, all by herself?" The horned man's eyes flickered with murderous hatred. "This woman killed a number of our friends. Let's make her death a slow one." The winged mutant let out an owl-like hoot of laughter. She had dared to journey deep into the wastelands by herself. She dared to try and hunt down their master by herself. What a foolish woman. The endless sands of the wasteland danced in the air, rising upwards towards the skies and the setting sun as a wild wind blew through the wastelands. It was dusk now. The wastelands were at sea level, and the blazing red sun was slowly sinking downwards past the horizon. A squad of vehicles suddenly emerged from the horizon in front of the sun, looking almost like a mirage generated by the foul, twisted air. The land in front of the convoy was already looking quite different from the lands they had left. All sorts of completely random buildings and ruins were intermingled together in layered rings, and all sorts of ancient refuse and garbage could be seen everywhere. A number of enormous, ancient metal buildings looked as though they had been planted into the sea of sand. They looked almost like giant shipwrecked ships that had sunken halfway into the sea. Sly Fox was in the leading, fastest vehicle. He turned his head and hollered backwards, "Everyone, slow down a bit. We've entered the mission area. The geography here is pretty weird, and there are a lot of ruins here. Be careful, all of you." "Got it," the mercenaries all simultaneously barked out energetically. Woola noticed that Cloudhawk had actually started to doze off a bit. He opened his massive maw, then gave Cloudhawk a hard bite on the thigh. Cloudhawk was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, and he very nearly fell off the ugly iron lizard. "Woola, what the hell? But Woola only barked right into his face. Mad Dog was using a tattered piece of cloth to polish his snow-bright machetes, a crude cigarette was hanging from his lips. He mumbled indistinctly, "Ruins like this are the perfect place for mutabeasts to hide, and there might be sweeper units hiding here as well. Starting now, you need to keep your eyes peeled." Cook offered a lit cigarette to Cloud Hawk. "Want a smoke?" Cloud Hawk shook his head. "I don't smoke." Cook smirked. "You don't smoke? You flippin' pansy." Cloud Hawk was too proud to take an insult like that lying down. He angrily grabbed the cigarette, then took a very deep puff. The crude ingredients Black Flag Outpost used to produce cigarettes instantly assaulted his lungs, making him feel like a ball of fire had just flown into his throat and was burning him from inside. Cloud Hawk coughed so loud, he nearly passed out for lack of air. "Ha! Rookie's completely useless. Drink some water and calm down." One of the Kinder mercenaries tossed a canteen of water to Cloud Hawk, who lifted it to his mouth and gulped it down without even thinking. Alas, it seemed as though the canteen was filled with acid, not water. Cloud Hawk's face instantly turned beet red and he immediately spewed all of the liquid out. "Motherfucker! That was moonshine." The mercenaries slapped their legs as they roared with laughter. Ever since this kid had joined their ranks, he had provided them with endless amusement. During this past month, they had teased him rather unmercifully whenever they had nothing better to do. Right at this moment, a voice rang out from the leading vehicle. It was one of the mercenaries calling out. "Careful, careful. There's something up ahead." The mercenaries instantly went on full alert, and Cloud Hawk hurriedly pulled out his staff. A group of animals had suddenly appeared to the front and left of their convoy. There were roughly 20 of the creatures, and they were roughly the size of wolf dogs. They had red eyes, their fur looked as tough as steel, and they were running at incredible speed as they moved straight towards the convoy. "Dire rats." The words came unbidden from Cloud Hawk's lips. These creatures were, without a question, the dire rats that had been described in the mission description. These things really were astonishingly large. Although they still looked like rats, they were nearly as large as ordinary rot wolves. Cloud Hawk had never seen such enormous rats before. So they had finally found their targets. 2 of the mercenaries drew their shortbows, then let fly 2 arrows. 2 of the dire rats let out miserable screeches as they collapsed to the floor. When the other dire rats saw this, they seemed to understand that they were in danger and all of them turned to flee towards another direction. "Ha! You aren't running anywhere." 2 of the vehicles accelerated after them. One of the enormous mutant rats was struck head-on and crushed beneath an enormous tire, its innards bursting out of its body. The mercenaries continued to accelerate, managing to crush a few more of the dire rats. The feeling of flesh being crushed beneath their vehicles was absolutely intoxicating to them. "Chase 'em down. Crush 'em all." 2 of the iron hedgehogs were already far ahead of the rest of the convoy, and they managed to crush and kill 7 or 8 of the dire rats. No matter how fierce and savage the dire rats were, they were still made of flesh and blood. How could they possibly resist being crushed by these metal monsters? Maybe this mission wouldn't be as tough as they thought. But just as Cloud Hawk was thinking this, he suddenly heard a startled cry from up ahead. "Watch out!" One of the iron hedgehogs suddenly lost its balance, kicking up an enormous storm of sand as it flew into the air, flipped over, then came crashing to the ground. Fortunately, the mercenaries seated atop the iron hedgehog were all very nimble. As soon as the vehicle had lost its balance, they immediately fled and so avoided being crushed underneath. What the hell had happened? Why had a perfectly fine vehicle suddenly flipped over? The other 4 vehicles came to a halt. Cloud Hawk pulled out a cloth and used it to cover his face, protecting it from the blowing sands. Black tri-bladed staff in hand, he disembarked and followed the other mercenaries over to find out what was going on. "Sly Fox, Mad Dog, look here." This, Cloudhawk squeezed in to take a closer look. The overturned iron hedgehog was planted firmly into the ground, its two front tires apparently smeared with some sort of green liquid that was incredibly corrosive. The tires had been almost completely melted, and even the metal parts had suffered severe damage. This vehicle had more or less been completely wrecked. Acid. One of those mutant rats probably had acid blood inside it. The mission report didn't say anything about acid rats. Sly Fox began to frown as he scanned the surroundings. Screw it. The geography here is very complicated, and we won't be able to use this car any further. Let's find a safe place to spend the night. We'll finish mapping this place out tomorrow. The mercenaries couldn't help but all mutter at the bad luck of it all. As for Cloudhawk, he was simply amazed. These mutant rats were incredible, their blood was apparently so acidic that it could corrode even metal. If any of it fell on him, his flesh and bones would probably all rot away. Hell, even a single drop of that acid would be enough to ruin him. Cook walked past Cloudhawk and patted him on the shoulders. All sorts of weird critters in the world these days. Let's go.